Colonel Richard Mace grabbed Claire Donovan's mission folder and threw it across the briefing table. Papers scattered everywhere. 6 men were dying in a canyon 60 miles away, and he was pointing his finger 1 inch from her face, his voice loud enough to shake the walls. "You will sit down and you will stay silent, or I will have you removed from this base tonight." His hands slammed the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. 23 soldiers watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Major Claire Donovan looked at that finger, then slowly, deliberately stood up even straighter. If you're watching this story for the first time, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night Colonel Richard Mace walked into that briefing room, he already had his mind made up about who was going to die. Not literally. Not in the way a villain in a movie plans things out with cold calculation and evil laughter. It was quieter than that, more casual, more dangerous. He walked in the way powerful men walk when they are completely certain that the world belongs to them. Shoulders wide, head slightly forward, the kind of posture that says, every decision made in this room will be filtered through me first. He dropped a folder on the table without looking at anyone. He adjusted his collar. He scanned the room the way a man scans a menu, not looking for anything extraordinary, just confirming that everything was already exactly what he expected. And then his eyes landed on Claire Donovan. She was sitting at the far end of the table, third chair on the left in the back corner, where the lighting was dim and the air smelled faintly of engine grease and old coffee. She wasn't trying to be invisible. She just wasn't trying to be noticed either. Her posture was straight. Her hands were folded on top of her mission folder. She was already reviewing the weather data on her tablet, her eyes moving across the numbers with the kind of focused calm that takes years and years to develop. She looked exactly like what she was, a professional. But Richard Mace didn't see that. He saw a problem. Who authorized a female pilot to be in this briefing, he said. Not asked. Said. The way you'd say who left the door open or who finished the last of the coffee. A statement of mild inconvenience, not a genuine question. The room shifted. 23 people sat around that table, and they all felt the air change at exactly the same moment. Some of them looked down. Some of them glanced sideways. 2 of the younger enlisted men near the door visibly held their breath. Captain Ethan Walker, who was seated near the front of the room, turned his head slowly toward Mace. He had dark circles under his eyes. He had been awake for 31 hours. He had already reviewed 5 different extraction plans and rejected all of them because none of them were good enough. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a clock was ticking because 6 of his people were still alive in Black Mesa Canyon barely. And every minute that passed inside this room was a minute they couldn't afford. "She's here because I requested her," Walker said. His voice was even, not confrontational, just factual. "Major Donovan has more canyon flight hours than anyone else on this base." Mace didn't even look at Walker when he responded. His eyes were still on Claire. "I don't care how many hours she has," he said. "This mission requires a different kind of judgment." Claire heard those words. She felt them land somewhere behind her sternum, the place where she had trained herself to absorb things that used to make her hands shake. Different kind of judgment. She had heard variations of that phrase her entire career. What it actually meant, translated plainly, was this situation requires a man. She kept her eyes on her tablet. Mace finally looked away from her and addressed the room at large. "We have a 6-man SEAL team stranded at grid reference November Kilo 743. He said, pulling up the map on the wall display. "Last communication was 47 minutes ago. Battery life on their emergency beacon is estimated at 2 to 4 hours. After that, we lose tracking entirely." He paused to let that settle. "The storm has made standard extraction impossible. The large rescue helicopters can't navigate the canyon safely in these wind conditions. We need a small, fast aircraft and a pilot with the skill and," he emphasized the next word with a small, deliberate weight, "experience to handle it." He looked around the room at the faces of the men. He didn't look at Claire. The insult was so smooth it was almost elegant. One of the junior pilots near the window cleared his throat. His name was Lieutenant Bradley Holt, and he was 26 years old and had been flying military helicopters for 3 years. He had never flown in a storm above Category 3. He had never flown a canyon mission at night. But he was sitting up straighter now because Colonel Mace was looking in his direction, and some part of Bradley Holt desperately wanted to be seen as the right answer to the question being asked. Claire noticed. She noticed everything. That was one of her gifts. I'll do it, Holt said. Mace nodded, not enthusiastically, more like someone checking a box. Good, Mace said. We'll put you in the A6. Get your pre-flight checklist started. And that was the moment Claire Donovan looked up from her tablet. Not dramatically, not with fire in her eyes. She just looked up the way a person looks up when they hear someone say something that is factually incorrect and dangerous. The A6 won't survive that canyon in these conditions, she said. The room went very quiet. Mace turned toward her slowly. He had the expression of a man who had just heard his furniture talk. Excuse me, he said. The A6 has a rotor diameter of 14.3 meters, Claire said, and her voice was calm, the way a river is calm before a waterfall, perfectly smooth on the surface with enormous force moving underneath. Black Mesa Canyon narrows to 11 meters in the third segment. Lieutenant Holt would be flying a 14-meter rotor system through an 11-meter gap in Category 4 wind gusts. She paused. There is no version of that math that keeps everyone alive. Holt's face had gone slightly pale. Mace stared at Claire for a long moment. The A6 is the designated aircraft for this type of mission, he said. The designated aircraft was chosen for a different canyon profile, Claire said. I've flown Black Mesa 6 times, twice at night. The third segment is why we lost a helicopter there in 2019. I was in the follow-on investigation team. I know exactly how and why that happened. A small sound came from somewhere at the table. It might have been someone inhaling sharply. It might have been the beginning of someone saying something and then deciding not to. Mace took 2 steps toward Claire's end of the table. He was a large man, not physically threatening, but the kind of large that comes from decades of being the most important person in every room. He used that size the way some people use volume, as a substitute for being right. Major Donovan, he said, and he lowered his voice in a way that was meant to feel intimate, but was actually just a form of pressure. I understand you have opinions, but in this room on this mission under my command, the decision about aircraft selection belongs to me, not to you. He let that hang. Are we clear? Claire held his gaze. We're clear, she said. Good. The math is still the math, Colonel. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Walker had his hands flat on the table. He was looking at the ceiling for just a second, the way a man does when he is doing calculations that have nothing to do with numbers, when he is calculating consequences and loyalties and what it will cost him to say the next thing out loud. She's right about the canyon width, Walker said. Mace turned toward Walker and something shifted in his expression. The casual dismissiveness hardened slightly into something closer to warning. Captain Walker, Mace said, I'd remind you that I outrank you in this room. Yes, sir, Walker said, and those 6 men in the canyon still outrank all of our egos. Nobody breathed. Mace looked at Walker for a very long time. Then he said, get her out of this room. I don't put lives in the hands of someone who shouldn't even be here. And that was the moment Claire Donovan stood up. Not because she was angry. She was somewhere underneath everything. But anger wasn't why she stood. She stood because she understood something that Richard Mace had never had to understand in his entire career. When you have spent years being told you don't belong somewhere, the moment you sit back down and accept it is the moment you prove them right. She stood up slowly. She picked up her mission folder and her tablet. She tucked them under her arm. The room was completely silent. I'll be in the flight line, she said. If anyone wants to look at the actual numbers before we send Lieutenant Holt into a wall. She walked toward the door. Nobody stopped her. She passed Colonel Mace without looking at him. She reached the door. She pushed it open. And she walked out into the Arizona night, where the storm was already building on the western horizon and the temperature had dropped 12 degrees in the last hour, and somewhere 63 miles away, 6 human beings were alive and hoping. The door closed behind her. Inside the room, nobody said anything for a full 4 seconds. Then Holt quietly said, what is the rotor diameter of the aircraft she flies? 11.1 meters, Walker said without looking up. Another silence. Oh, Holt said. Outside, Claire walked across the flight line with her head down against the wind. The desert at night in a building storm was a particular kind of hostile, not aggressive, just indifferent, the way nature is indifferent to the small dramas of human beings arguing in temporary shelters. The wind pulled at her flight suit. Grit hit her face. She didn't flinch. She had her own aircraft to check, just in case. Because Claire Donovan had learned very early in her career that permission and necessity were two different things. And sometimes when the situation was bad enough, necessity had a way of making permission irrelevant. She had been flying military helicopters since she was 23 years old. Not because it was easy, not because anyone handed it to her, because she had walked into the recruitment office at 22 with a private pilot license she had earned at 19 after 2 years of working overtime shifts at a diner outside of Tucson to pay for flight lessons that cost more per hour than she made in a shift. Because she had scored higher on every aptitude evaluation than 91% of her cohort. Because when the instructor told her the advanced rotary course was, quote, too demanding for her, she completed it with the highest evaluation score in her training class and said absolutely nothing about it afterward. She had never needed to be the loudest person in the room. She just needed to be the one still standing when the noise stopped. Her aircraft was parked in Base 7, a Black Hawk variant that had been modified for special operations use. Smaller rotor system, more powerful engine relative to its weight, designed specifically for operations in confined spaces at high altitude and in adverse conditions. 11.1-meter rotor diameter. She began her pre-flight checks alone, working through the list with the methodical precision that had been trained into her through 12 years of practice until it was as automatic as breathing. She moved around the aircraft without hurrying. She tested controls. She checked fluid levels. She examined the rotor assembly with her flashlight in the growing wind. She knew doing this that there was a reasonable chance she would not be authorized to fly tonight. She knew there was a reasonable chance that Mace would send Holt anyway with the wrong aircraft, because the alternative was admitting that the woman he dismissed was right. She knew people had died before because someone with authority refused to update their assessment. She also knew she had done everything she could do inside that room. The rest was not in her hands. What was in her hands was this aircraft which she was going to have ready to fly in case the rest of the night went differently from what Mace intended. She was on her third system check when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. "I know it was wrong," Walker's voice said. "What he did in there." Claire kept working. "I've been in rooms like that my whole career," she said. "It wasn't the first time." Walker came around the nose of the aircraft and leaned against the landing skid. He looked exhausted in the way that men look exhausted when they are carrying something beyond tiredness, when the weight is not sleep but consequence. "How many times can you absorb it before it changes you?" he asked. Claire paused in her work and looked at him. "I stopped counting," she said. "Counting doesn't help you fly." Walker looked out at the dark horizon where the storm was moving. "He's going to send Holt," Walker said. "I know. Holt is a good pilot." "Holt is an excellent pilot," Claire said, "in the right aircraft on the right mission. Tonight is not the right mission for him, and he knows it. I saw it on his face." Walker was quiet for a moment. "Claire," he said, and the use of her first name changed the conversation slightly, moved it from professional into something more honest. "If something happens to that team tonight because of this decision, don't," she said. "I need you to understand, Ethan." She used his first name deliberately, evening the scales. "I understand everything. I understood it when I walked out of that room. I'm not standing here because I need you to validate what just happened." She looked back at her aircraft. "I'm standing here because I'm going to be ready. Whatever happens next, I'm going to be ready." Walker watched her for a moment. "He could have you removed from the flight line," he said. "He could," she agreed. "Will you go if he orders it?" Claire was quiet for just a second. "I will follow proper military procedure," she said carefully. Walker almost smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "That's not exactly an answer," he said. "No," she agreed, "it's not." Walker pushed off from the landing skid. He looked at the aircraft, then back at her. "The team has 2 hours of beacon battery left," he said. "Maybe 3. I know. If you were going to fly that canyon tonight," he said slowly, "what would you need?" Claire looked at him directly. 15 minutes to finish pre-flight, a co-pilot who follows instructions without asking questions, and someone to make sure that door opens when I taxi to the runway. Walker looked at the sky again. "I'll see what I can do about the door," he said. He walked away. Claire went back to her pre-flight checks. Inside the briefing room, she would learn later there had been another 6 minutes of discussion after she left. Mace had confirmed Holt as the pilot. Holt had said yes. Then Holt had gone very quiet for about 30 seconds. Then Holt had said very quietly, "Sir, I need to ask when they did the 2019 accident investigation for Black Mesa Canyon. What was the primary cause of the crash?" Mace had told him to focus on the mission. Holt had pulled up the investigation report on his tablet. He read for 45 seconds. Then he set the tablet down on the table and looked at Mace and said, "Sir, the primary cause was rotor clearance failure in the third segment of the canyon. The secondary cause was wind-induced lateral drift during approach. The aircraft involved had a rotor diameter of 14.7 meters. He paused. The A6 has a rotor diameter of 14.3. The room was very quiet. "The difference is 4 centimeters, sir," Holt said, "between what killed the 2019 crew and what you're authorizing me to fly tonight." Mace looked at Holt for a long time. Then he said, "Are you refusing the mission?" Holt was 26 years old. He had a younger sister he called every Sunday. He had a girlfriend in Pensacola who was waiting for him to come home in 3 weeks. He had been in the military for 4 years, and in that entire time, he had never directly contradicted a superior officer on an operational matter. He thought about all of that. Then he said, "No, sir, I'm not refusing. I'm reporting a safety concern prior to execution, as I am required to do by regulation." He paused. "And I'm recommending that we consider alternative aircraft before we launch." Another silence. One of the senior NCOs in the room, a master sergeant named Delgado who had been in special operations for 19 years and had the kind of quiet authority that comes from having been right in very difficult situations, many times looked up from the map he'd been studying and said nothing. He just looked at Mace, steadily, with the particular expression of a man who has seen enough missions go wrong to know exactly what kind of decision point this was. Mace felt the room. The room had changed. He was still the ranking officer. That hadn't changed. But authority and credibility are two different things, and somewhere in the last 8 minutes, his credibility had developed a fracture that he could feel even if he couldn't see it. "Where is Major Donovan?" he said. "Flight line, sir," said someone near the door. "Base 7, she's been running pre-flight checks." Mace was quiet. "Of course she has," he said. And something in his voice just for a moment shifted from contempt towards something that might have been in a different kind of man, in a different kind of moment, close to reluctant respect. He picked up his radio. Outside on the flight line, Claire's radio crackled. "Donovan," Mace's voice said, flat, without warmth, without apology. "Brief me on the alternative aircraft in your canyon flight profile. Full technical breakdown." 5 minutes. Claire stopped her pre-flight check. She took a slow breath. She pressed her radio. "Copy that, Colonel," she said. 5 minutes. She clipped the radio back to her suit. The wind was picking up. The storm was closer now. She could see the edge of it on the western horizon, a wall of darkness moving with the slow, inevitable force of something that doesn't care at all about timelines or arguments or the egos of men in briefing rooms. She picked up her tablet. She pulled up the canyon flight profile she had already mapped. She had built it 3 hours ago before the briefing because that was who she was. She planned for the missions people hadn't decided to give her yet because she had learned that opportunity and preparation had to meet at exactly the right moment, and you couldn't control the timing of the opportunity, so you never ever stopped working on the preparation. Her hands were perfectly steady. She wasn't thinking about Mace. She wasn't thinking about the room she had just been dismissed from. She was thinking about 6 people in a canyon 63 miles away, in a storm that was getting worse every minute, with a beacon battery that was counting down towards silence. She walked back toward the command shelter. The wind hit her from the side. She leaned into it and kept moving. That was the first thing Walker had noticed about her months ago during a training exercise in the Sonoran Desert, the way she moved through resistance. Not around it, not by waiting for it to stop. She simply leaned into it and kept moving, as if she had long ago made a private agreement with difficulty that it could show up whenever it wanted, but it was not going to stop her from reaching the thing she was moving toward. He had made a note in her file that day. A small one. Personal, not official. The note said, "Watch this one." She pushed open the door to the command shelter and walked back into the room. Every head turned. Mace was standing at the front with his arms crossed. Claire walked to the display wall without being invited to. She connected her tablet. She pulled up the canyon schematic and the flight profile she had built. Segment 1 is manageable, she said without preamble, without warm-up. Width is 22 meters at entry. Wind channeling is predictable, we account for it on approach. Segment 2 narrows to 17 meters. That's where the vertical turbulence starts. The trick is to fly the right altitude band too low, and you get the ground effect bouncing off the canyon walls too high, and you're in the full force of the upper wind shear. There's a band at 40 to 60 feet above the canyon floor that's actually calmer than either extreme. She pointed at the schematic. I've flown it twice. It holds. She paused. Segment 3 is where the 2019 aircraft was lost. 11-meter width at its narrowest point, which is here. She touched the screen 240 meters before the extraction zone. My aircraft clears it with a margin of 45 centimeters on each side. That is tight, but it is within operational parameters. Another pause. If I drift more than 40 centimeters in either direction at that point, we hit the wall. That's the mission. That's the real margin. The room was silent. So there is no room for error, Mace said. There is almost no room for error, Claire corrected him, which is different. Almost no room is not zero room. You fly it right, you get through. You fly it wrong, you don't. She looked at him steadily. I plan to fly it right. Mace looked at her for a long time. In those seconds, Claire kept her expression neutral. She had learned how to do that, not from military training, but from years of experience in rooms where showing emotion was used as evidence against her, where any flicker of anger or frustration, or yes, even confidence, would be translated by certain people into proof that she was volatile or irrational or out of her depth. She had built a surface that looked like calm because calm was the only language certain rooms would listen to. But underneath that surface, she knew exactly what was at stake in this moment. Not just the 6 people in the canyon, her. If she got this wrong, it would not just be a mission failure. It would become the story. The female pilot who insisted on flying the impossible mission and proved exactly why she shouldn't have been there. It would become a data point that men like Mace would carry into future briefing rooms and use against the next woman who stood up. If she got it right, maybe it would be one more piece of evidence that had to be weighed. She had never been able to afford to fail in the way that some of her colleagues could fail and recover from and be given another chance. That was the truth of her situation. She had known it from the first day, and she had chosen to fly anyway. Mace uncrossed his arms. Walker, he said. Sir, your assessment. Walker looked at the schematic. He looked at Claire. He looked back at the schematic. Major Donovan's flight profile is technically sound, he said. The aircraft choice is correct. The flight parameters are based on documented experience with this specific canyon. And he paused. We are currently at 1 hour and 53 minutes since last communication with the team. We don't have time for another full planning cycle. Mace looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at the map. He looked at Claire. The thing about men like Richard Mace and Claire had known enough of them to understand this with some complexity was that they were not always wrong about everything. They were wrong about the things that had never been tested. But some of them, when the situation stripped away the performance and the rank and the need to be seen as the authority in the room, could look at a real problem and make a real decision. This was that moment. Mace took a long breath. Major Donovan, he said. Sir, you'll fly the mission. Yes, sir. Under my operational authority on my terms with full debrief accountability when you return. Understood. And Donovan, he paused. If you have any doubt at any point, any doubt, you turn around. Claire looked at him. With respect, Colonel, she said, if I turn around, they don't get another chance. Mace held her gaze. Then he looked away first. Brief the SEAL operators, he said. We launch in 20. Claire turned back to her tablet. She didn't smile. She didn't look around the room for validation. She didn't do any of the things that the moment might have invited. She just started working. Because there were 6 people 63 miles away in a canyon in a storm with a battery that had just ticked under 2 hours. And every second she spent in this room not preparing was a second she was taking from them. Behind her, she heard Holt say something to the man next to him. She caught only part of it, something like 45 centimeters on each side. His voice was quiet and held a particular kind of weight, the weight of a young man revising his understanding of what skill looks like. She didn't acknowledge it. She just kept working. The storm was coming. 6 people were waiting, and Major Claire Donovan had a canyon to fly. She walked back out to Base 7. The wind was stronger now. The temperature had dropped another 4 degrees. She could smell the rain coming still miles away but moving fast. The desert has a particular smell before rain, something between copper and stone and possibility, and she had learned to read it the way pilots learn to read everything as information rather than experience. Her co-pilot was already at the aircraft when she arrived. His name was Warrant Officer James Reyes, 29 years old, and he had been hand-selected by Walker about 30 minutes ago. He had flown with Claire twice in training exercises. He had a reputation for being calm and precise and for never ever asking unnecessary questions when it counted. He looked at her as she approached. "I heard about the briefing," he said. "Everybody heard about the briefing," she said. "For what it's worth," he said. "I requested to fly with you when Walker asked for volunteers." Claire paused. "You were the only volunteer?" she asked. Reyes's expression was perfectly neutral. "I was the fastest volunteer," he said. It was technically a different thing from what she asked. She noticed that. "Right," she said. "Strap in, Reyes. We've got work to do." The SEAL operators arrived 6 minutes later. 4 of them. Full combat load medical equipment extraction rigging. Their team leader was a chief petty officer named Marcus Webb, 34 years old, built like someone had assembled him specifically for the job of operating in places where most people couldn't function. He shook Claire's hand when he met her, which was not always something that happened automatically, and he looked her in the eyes when she briefed the flight plan. He asked 3 questions. All of them were specific. All of them were the right questions. When she finished, he said, "I've heard your name before. You were on the Black Mesa investigation team." "Yes," she said. "So you know exactly what we're flying into?" "Yes," Webb nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "I'd rather fly with someone who knows what can go wrong than someone who thinks nothing can." He stepped back. His operators loaded into the aircraft. Claire climbed into the cockpit. She strapped in. She reached in for her pre-flight checklist, not because she hadn't already completed it, but because that was the protocol, and she followed protocol even when she could recite the checklist backward in her sleep, because protocol existed for a reason. And that reason was exactly this kind of night when everything was moving fast and the pressure was enormous and the margin was 45 centimeters on each side. She ran through it one more time. Every item, every check, every system. Then she closed the checklist. She put on her helmet. She looked through the cockpit glass at the Arizona desert, stretching away in every direction, the darkness broken only by the lights of the base and the distant building wall of the storm. Somewhere in her chest, something tightened. Not fear exactly, something more precise than fear. The feeling she always got in the last minutes before a difficult flight, a heightening of everything, an awareness that what was about to happen required everything she had and that everything she had was in this moment enough. She had to believe that. She had always had to believe that. "Control, this is Donovan," she said into her headset. "Requesting clearance for departure runway 27 heading 265 Black Mesa Canyon extraction mission." A pause, then Walker's voice came back. "Donovan, control, you are cleared for departure. Winds from the southwest at 31 knots, gusting to 44. Visibility declining. You have a window." A pause. "Use it." Claire looked at Reyes. Reyes nodded. She put her hands on the controls. The engine came to life. The rotor began to turn. The aircraft shuddered against the wind, and Claire felt that shudder the way a rider feels a horse respond, not as instability, but as aliveness, as the language between herself and the machine she was about to ask to do something extraordinary. She breathed in. She breathed out. She lifted. The helicopter rose from the pad, and the Arizona night swallowed it whole, and the storm moved toward her, and she moved toward the storm, and 63 miles away in the dark of Black Mesa Canyon, 6 people who were running out of time heard nothing yet knew nothing, yet could do nothing but wait and hope and keep the beacon burning. She flew toward them because somebody had to, because she refused to be the person who looked at that beacon and decided the math was too hard, because 6 people in a canyon in a storm deserved someone who would fly into the impossible with 45 centimeters of margin on each side and the absolute unshakable intention of bringing them home. The base lights disappeared behind her. The storm opened up ahead, and Major Claire Donovan, 32 years old, the woman nobody expected, the pilot who'd been told in 6 different ways to sit back down and stay in her place, flew straight into the heart of it. The helicopter lifted off the pad at 11:47 p.m. Claire felt the aircraft lurch sideways the moment it cleared the ground. Not a small lurch, a full body shove, the kind that separates pilots who have trained in bad weather from pilots who have read about it. The wind hit from the southwest at 38 knots and immediately tried to push them back toward the hangar wall. She corrected, hard, precise, without thinking about it the way a person corrects their balance walking downstairs in the dark, the body knowing what the mind hasn't finished processing yet. Reyes said nothing. His hands were on the secondary controls ready. His eyes moved between the instrument panel and the darkness ahead. He had flown with Claire twice before, and he already knew that the first 60 seconds of a difficult departure told you everything about the pilot you were flying with. Some pilots fought the aircraft. Some pilots argued with the wind. Claire Donovan did neither. She listened to it. "Wind's coming in waves," she said, her voice flat and focused. "Count the pattern. Every wave is roughly 11 seconds apart. I'm going to use the gaps." Reyes looked at the wind readout. He counted. 11 seconds, he confirmed. "Maybe 12. 12, she said. "Don't round down tonight." Behind them in the cabin, the Force SEAL operator sat in complete silence. Chief Webb had his eyes open and his expression composed the particular blankness of a man who has put himself in someone else's hands and made peace with it. The other three were checking gear, tightening straps, doing the small physical rituals of people who cannot control what is happening around them, but can control the inches of their own preparation. The aircraft broke through the first cloud layer at 400 feet, and the world outside became nothing. Not dark, nothing. The kind of absolute visual absence that takes experienced pilots by surprise the first time they encounter it, even when they know it's coming. The instruments became everything. The cockpit became the universe. "Instruments only," Claire said. "Instruments only," Reyes echoed. The radio crackled. Walker's voice came through from the command shelter 60 miles behind them and moving further away every second. "Donovan Control, we have a weather update. The cell is moving faster than predicted. You have approximately 90 minutes before the second wave hits the canyon." 90 minutes. Claire processed that without reacting to it. 90 minutes. 40 minutes of flight to the canyon, which left 50 minutes for extraction, which was tight, very tight, but not impossible. "Copy, Control," she said, 90 minutes. She didn't tell Walker that 90 minutes was almost exactly the minimum they needed to do this right. She didn't tell him what happened if anything went wrong and cost them 10 minutes they didn't have. He knew. She knew he knew. And saying it out loud didn't change the math. At 11:54 p.m., 7 minutes into the flight, the aircraft took its first serious hit. Not a gust, a wall. A mass of air moving laterally with enough force to drop the helicopter sideways in the sky like something had reached up and shoved it. The altimeter swung, the horizon indicator rolled. An alarm chirped, once sharp and accusatory, and then Claire's hands were already moving before the alarm finished its first second of sound. She brought the nose down, traded altitude for airspeed, let the aircraft fall 30 feet, and then used the momentum to pull back into control. The whole sequence took 4 seconds and cost them 112 feet of altitude and recovered everything. Reyes exhaled. "That's going to keep happening," Claire said. "I know," Reyes said. "Tell me if I missed something." Reyes looked at her. In 12 years of flying, nobody had ever said that to him before a difficult mission. Not one pilot. Not once. The standard cockpit culture was authority gradient. The pilot in command was the pilot in command, and the co-pilot's job was to manage systems and support, not to critique the stick work of the person sitting left seat. Claire had just told him that tonight was different. "I will," he said, and he meant it. In the back, Chief Webb leaned forward toward the cockpit opening. "How are we doing?" he asked. Not anxiously, just factually. "We're on profile," Claire said. That drop was on profile 1. That drop was the weather being exactly what the forecast said it would be, Claire said. "If it surprises me, I'll tell you." Webb leaned back. He said to the operator next to him very quietly, "I like her." The operator, a young petty officer named Santos, who had been gripping his seat harness with both hands since takeoff, did not look entirely comforted. At 12:03 a.m., 16 minutes into the flight, the beacon signal from the stranded team spiked and then went intermittent. Claire heard it in her headset before the display confirmed it. A steady pulse that had been a reliable drumbeat for the past 20 minutes suddenly stuttered. 1 full second of signal, half a second of silence, then signal again, then 2 full seconds of silence. "Control Donovan," she said immediately. "The beacon is intermittent. Talk to me." Walker's voice came back fast. He had been watching the same thing. "We see it. Could be battery degradation, could be the storm interfering with transmission. We're trying to raise them on radio." A pause. No response on radio. Claire stared at the instrument panel. In the back, Webb had his own radio out, trying his team's encrypted channel. His face was doing something very controlled and very deliberate, the suppression of a reaction that wanted to be much larger than the one he was showing. "Anything?" Claire asked. "Static," Webb said. "They're there, I can feel it, but static." "Feel it," she said, not sarcastically, just noting it. "I've been running missions with those men for 4 years, Webb said. 2 of them have kids who were born while we were on deployment. One of them got married 6 months ago." "They're there." Claire nodded once. "Then we keep going," she said. At 12:09 a.m., the beacon signal steadied again. It was a small thing, a line on a display returning to a regular pulse. But the collective exhale that moved through the helicopter was physical, like pressure releasing from a sealed container. "Got them," Reyes said. "Got them," Claire confirmed. The beacon was moving, slightly, which meant someone down there was alive and conscious and had changed position within the last 6 minutes, which meant the situation was bad, but not terminal. Yet. 28 minutes to canyon entry, Reyes said. 27, Claire corrected, pushing the throttle slightly. Reyes checked the number. She was right. She had already done the calculation while he was still reading the display. He updated his instruments. At 12:14 a.m., 23 minutes into the flight, Walker's voice came back on the radio, and it had a different quality to it. Tighter, faster. "Donovan Control, we have a complication." Claire didn't say, "What do you mean," or "what kind of complication?" She just said, "Talk." "Intel update from the ground. The team's last known position has changed. They moved approximately 300 meters northeast from grid November Kilo 743, which puts them, a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds, deeper into the canyon, past the third segment. The third segment, past the narrowest point, which meant Claire would have to fly through the 11-meter gap which she had planned to navigate and then turn back, and instead she would have to continue past it into unknown territory, landload 6 people plus combat equipment, and then fly back out through the same 11-meter gap with additional weight. Reyes turned and looked at her. His expression asked the question without words. Claire answered without words either. A single small tightening around the eyes that meant I heard it. I'm processing it. Stay with me. "Control," she said. "What is their exact new grid?" Walker gave her the coordinates. She plotted them on her display while flying. Both hands occupied with different tasks, her mind splitting its attention with the particular efficiency of someone who has practiced this exact kind of multitasking until it stopped feeling like multitasking and started feeling like thinking. The new position was 340 meters past the narrowest point of the canyon. The landing zone she had identified before departure was no longer viable. She had a new problem. "I need to know the canyon floor profile past segment 3, she said. "Stand by," Walker said. While she waited, she did the calculations she could do with what she already knew. She had flown Black Mesa Canyon 6 times. She had studied the 2019 accident investigation for 4 months. She knew the canyon better than almost anyone alive, but her knowledge ended at the extraction zone she had planned for. Past that point, her certainty decreased significantly. "Donovan," Walker's voice came back. "We're pulling the topographical data now. The canyon widens past segment 3, approximately 16 to 19 meters through the extended section. There is a flat area approximately 360 meters past the third segment that was used as a ranger staging area in 2017. Dimensions are roughly 30 by 20 meters. Claire ran the numbers. 30 by 20 meters. Enough space. Barely. "Wind behavior in the extended section," she asked. "Unknown," Walker said. She had expected that answer. "All right," she said. "Claire," Walker said, and again the use of her name carried a different weight, a crack in the professional surface. "This is significantly more complex than the original plan." "Yes," she said. "You have the authority to abort." "I know." A pause. "Are you going to Claire looked at the beacon signal on her display. Still pulsing, 340 meters past the segment 3 gap. 6 people. 2 hours into a storm that was going to get much worse. No, she said. Silence on the radio for 3 seconds. Then copy that. Control will maintain communication. What do you need from us? Keep trying to raise them on radio, she said. If you get through, tell them to mark the landing zone with whatever light source they have. Anything. I don't care how small. Copy. And Walker. Still here. Tell Mace, she said, and she kept her voice completely neutral, that the mission parameters have changed and I'm adapting. Another pause. He's standing right here, Walker said. He heard everything. Good, Claire said. In the command shelter 60 miles away, Colonel Richard Mace was standing with his arms at his sides and his jaw set, staring at the tracking display that showed Claire's helicopter moving through the storm toward a canyon that had just become more dangerous than anyone had planned for. The man next to him, a senior operations officer named Colonel Fairbanks, said quietly, "She's still going." Mace said nothing. Most pilots would have turned back, Fairbanks said. Mace said nothing for another 4 seconds. Then he picked up the radio and said, "Donovan." "Mace." Claire's voice came back steady as the instrument panel in front of her, and, "Sir?" "Your updated flight parameters are approved," he said. "Full operational discretion." A pause. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. Mace set the radio down. He looked at the tracking display. He looked at the storm cell moving toward the canyon. And whatever was happening behind his eyes, he kept it entirely to himself. At 12:31 a.m., the helicopter reached the mouth of Black Mesa Canyon. The transition was immediate and violent and completely expected, and still nothing like training had fully prepared anyone for it. The open-air turbulence of the desert flight became something different the moment the canyon walls rose on either side. Not smoother, but different in character. The wind channeled and concentrated and unpredictable in a way that made every correction a slightly different problem from the last one. "Entry," Claire said. "Entry confirmed," Reyes said. "Altimeter on canyon floor reference. We're at 62 feet above deck." "Going to 55, Claire said. "The band is 40 to 60. I want the middle." She brought the aircraft down. The canyon walls appeared on the radar display as solid lines pressing in from either side, and the psychological weight of those lines, the visual representation of the margin between survival and catastrophe, was something Claire had prepared herself for specifically. She had thought about it for 3 hours before departure. She had made herself sit with it, feel it, and arrive at a place where it was information rather than fear. It was still fear. She just knew what to do with it. "Segment 1, Reyes said, width reading 21 meters. "Good," she said. The helicopter moved through segment 1 at a speed that felt simultaneously too fast and too slow. Too fast because every second brought them closer to segment 3. Too slow because in the back of the aircraft, 6 people were waiting and the second storm wave was coming. Chief Webb was leaning forward again. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Claire. "Make it fast," she said. "Have you ever aborted a canyon mission?" "Once," she said. "What happened?" "The aircraft had a hydraulic fault on approach. Wasn't safe to continue." "And if the aircraft is fine, then I don't abort," she said. Webb sat back. He looked at Santos, who was still holding his harness. "Let go of the harness," Webb said to him quietly. "You're going to need your hands." Santos let go. "Segment 2, Reyes said. Width 17 meters. Wind variance increasing." The aircraft bucked. Once. Hard. Claire absorbed it without a sound, her hands making the correction before her body had registered the disturbance. "That's the vertical turbulence starting," she said. "It's going to try to push us up. I'm going to resist it. You will feel the aircraft working harder." "Feeling it already," Reyes said. She pushed through it. The sound inside the cockpit changed. The engine note shifted from a steady roar to something more urgent, more effortful, the acoustic signature of a machine being asked to operate very close to the edge of its design parameters. Not beyond them, not yet, but close enough that the sound alone communicated the situation with perfect clarity. At 12:38 a.m. segment 3, 11 meters, Reyes said, and his voice was different now. Not less professional, just more present, more in the body of the moment. 11 meters and narrowing. I see it. 45 centimeters on each side. I know what we have. Just Reyes. Yeah. Don't talk through the gap. He stopped. She flew. The narrowest point of the canyon was a passage that lasted exactly 9 seconds at their current speed. Claire had calculated that before departure. 9 seconds. In 9 seconds, the rotor tips would pass within 45 centimeters of solid canyon rock on both sides, and the wind would try to push her toward one wall or the other, and she would have to resist that push with exactly the right amount of correction. Not too little, not too much, because too much correction in the wrong direction was as fatal as too little. She breathed in before the gap. She did not breathe out until they were through. 6 seconds, 7, 8, 9. The canyon walls opened. Reyes said clear. And in the back, someone she never knew who exhaled so completely that it was audible over the engine noise. A sound that held inside it everything that had been compressed into those 9 seconds of 45 centimeters of margin. Clear, Claire confirmed. Her hands were shaking. Not visibly. Not in any way that affected the controls. But she could feel it in the tendons, the fine tremor of adrenaline that the body produces when it has been asked to perform at the absolute edge of its capability. She knew what that tremor was. She didn't fight it. She just let it happen underneath the steadiness, the way a current runs beneath ice. 340 meters, Reyes said. Canyon widening, 16 meters, 17. The aircraft moved into the extended section of the canyon, and the character of the flight changed again. More room, different wind patterns, not easier exactly, but differently difficult, which after the concentrated intensity of segment 3 felt almost like relief. Looking for the staging area, Claire said. She scanned with everything she had, instruments, radar, the thin visual information available through the cockpit glass. Then Reyes said, there. A light, small, red, possibly chemical, possibly a flashlight with a filter, but a light in the darkness 340 meters past the gap, moving in a slow circle. Someone was alive and they were marking the landing zone. I see it, Claire said. She keyed the radio. Control Donovan, we are past segment 3. I have a visual on a light source in the target area. Beginning approach. Walker's voice came back immediately. Copy Donovan. You are on a 47-minute window. Second storm wave is accelerating. 47 minutes. Load 6 people. Fly back through segment 3. Navigate segments 2 and 1 in deteriorating conditions. 47 minutes. Copy, she said. She began the approach to the staging area, and what she found when she got there, what she saw in that canyon in the last minutes before everything almost came apart, was something that no amount of pre-flight planning had prepared her for. The landing zone was smaller than the topographical data had indicated. Not 30 by 20 meters, more like 22 by 15, and it was not flat. It was tilted. 4 degrees of slope running left to right, which on level ground would be trivial, and in a confined canyon approach. In Category 4 wind gust was a complication that arrived in her mind like a sudden and very loud noise in an otherwise silent room. Zone is sloped, Reyes said. I see it. What do we do? Claire looked at the slope. She looked at the light source moving in the corner of the zone. She looked at the wind readout. She looked at the wall on the left side of the zone, which was closer than she wanted. She made a decision in approximately 2 seconds. I land with the slope, she said. Uphill skid takes the weight first. We hold in position with throttle, not with collective. Get them loaded fast. The left skid is going to be higher, Reyes said. Yes. How much higher? About 1.5 feet. Loading 6 people onto a helicopter, sitting at an angle in a 30-knot crosswind in a canyon. That's correct, Claire said. Reyes was quiet for 2 seconds. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, as she began the landing approach. The light source on the ground stopped circling. It went still. Pointing up, pointing at her, someone down there had heard the helicopter and understood that she was coming down and that the next minutes were going to require everything they had left. She came down slowly. The wind pushed from the right. She corrected. The slope came up to meet the left skid first, and she caught it with exactly the right touch, firm enough to hold wide enough to absorb the contact without bouncing, the helicopter settling onto the tilted ground with a controlled awkwardness that was about as close to grace as physics permitted under these conditions. The aircraft shuddered. The engine strained to hold position against the slope and the wind simultaneously. They're moving, Reyes said. I can see them. Claire couldn't look. She was keeping the helicopter on the ground with every skill she had. Webb was already out of his seat, moving to the door, pulling it open against the wind. He stepped down onto the sloped ground and immediately had to brace against the tilt and the gusts. He grabbed the door frame with one hand and used his other hand to wave his team out. Go, 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 he said. The SEAL operators moved fast, gear first to the rear of the aircraft. Then they turned and went toward the shadows where the people they'd come to find were waiting. Claire heard it before she saw it, the sound of additional weight moving into the aircraft behind her, the subtle shifts in how the helicopter was sitting on the ground, the slight changes in what the controls were telling her. First two loaded, Reyes reported. The engine was working very hard. 3 and 4. The slope was getting worse. More weight on the high side. 5. An alarm chirped. Not a critical alarm, a weight distribution warning, telling her what she already knew. 6, Reyes said, then Webb's voice right behind her ear. We have a problem. She didn't turn around. What kind, she said. One of them can't move on his own. We need 30 seconds to get him secured. 30 seconds. She looked at the wind readout. She looked at the engine readout. She looked at the slope which the helicopter was sitting on at an angle that was already making the weight distribution alarm complain. 30 seconds, she said. You have 30 seconds, and then we are leaving this ground whether he's secured or not. Understood, Webb said. She held the aircraft on that slope for 30 seconds with nothing but skill and throttle and the kind of focused intention that exists below the level of language, below the level of thought, pure physical and mental integration, the helicopter and the woman and the storm and the canyon, all in the same moment, all demanding the same impossible thing, all receiving it. At exactly 30 seconds, Webb said, he's secured, we're good. Doors, she said. The doors closed. She pushed the throttle. The helicopter groaned. It did not rise. She pushed harder. The engine sound shifted into something that was not quite protest, but was not comfortable, either the mechanical equivalent of maximum effort of a system being asked to give everything it was rated for, and perhaps slightly more. The aircraft lifted 1 inch. 2. The slope fought them. The weight fought them. The wind fought them, pushing down instead of helping a crosswind at this altitude and in this canyon behaving unlike anything in the textbook diagrams. Come on, Reyes said almost under his breath, and it was the first time since takeoff that his voice had slipped into anything other than professionalism. Don't talk to it, Claire said. Watch the left wall. She felt the aircraft trying to drift left with the weight distribution. She corrected. She kept the throttle at maximum. She felt the skids leave the ground with the grudging reluctance of something that did not want to let go. 3 inches, a foot, 3 feet. We're up, Reyes said. We're not clear, she said. She moved the aircraft forward and up simultaneously, threading through the narrowest part of the extended canyon section with the delicacy of someone threading a needle while wearing work gloves. Every degree of pitch, every degree of bank, calculated and executed in real time against a wind that was changing every 4 seconds. Behind her, absolute silence, not peaceful silence. The silence of people who understand that the person in front of them is doing something that they cannot help with, and that is the only thing standing between them and the canyon walls. She climbed out of the extended section. She reached the mouth of segment 3, and she stopped. Not physically. The aircraft kept moving, but something in her mind stopped, took one single still moment to look at what was ahead, the 9-second gap, the 45 centimeters on each side, the wind that was now 5 knots faster than on the inbound flight and coming from a slightly different angle, and assessed it with complete honesty. The margin going back was different. The aircraft was heavier now, more than 500 additional pounds of people and equipment. The heavier aircraft would respond more slowly to inputs. The wind had shifted 6 degrees south, which changed the drift calculation through the gap, and the second storm wave was 39 minutes out. All of that was real. All of that was true. And on the other side of segment 3, on the other side of those 9 seconds, there were people waiting for her at a base 60 miles away. 6 people behind her who had been waiting in this canyon since yesterday evening, and one mission that was not finished. Reyes, she said, here. The gap is going to be different on the way back. I know. The wind shift changes the drift. I'm going to have to hold left correction through the whole 9 seconds. If I hold too much, I hit the left wall, If I hold too little, the wind pushes me right. What's the new margin? She calculated quickly. 31 centimeters on the left, she said. 59 on the right. Reyes processed that. Asymmetric, he said. Yes. You flew the outbound through the center. I know. 31 centimeters is about the width of a school ruler, she said. I know exactly what it is. Silence for 2 seconds. What do you need from me? He said. Call the wall distance if you can see it on radar. But if I tell you to stop calling, stop immediately. I need full concentration and no competing input. Understood. And Reyes? Yeah. If something happens to me in the gap, she said completely calmly, take the controls and pull full collective. Straight up. Don't try to navigate. Just get the rotor clear of the canyon. Reyes turned and looked at her. It was the only moment in the entire flight that he looked away from his instruments. Nothing is going to happen to you, he said. It was not a professionally appropriate thing to say. It was not an assessment based on data. It was exactly what a human being says to another human being when they are sitting next to them in the dark and the stakes are everything. Claire looked straight ahead. Probably not, she said, but now you know. She flew towards segment 3. At 12:57 a.m., she entered the gap. The 9 seconds began. Left correction. Steady, not too much. The wind came from the right and she leaned into it with exactly the calculated 31 centimeters of buffer on her left and held that line with every ounce of precision her 12 years of experience had built into her hands and her eyes and the part of her brain that had long ago stopped translating, flying into language, and simply was it. 1 second. 2. 3. The aircraft shuddered. A gust slightly stronger than the baseline. Her hands moved before her mind named what was happening. Correction applied. Overcorrection avoided. 4. 5. 6. From behind her, she heard someone breathing. Not panicked, just breathing. Deliberately. The way people breathe when they are managing themselves through something that is larger than they are. 7. 8. Clear on left, Reyes said. Right wall coming. Don't, she said. He stopped. 9. The canyon opened. The walls fell back. The radar display showed open space on both sides and the navigator confirmed segment 2 and Claire held the aircraft straight and level for exactly 3 seconds before she allowed herself to breathe. 3 seconds. Then she breathed. Behind her in the cabin, someone said, "Oh God," in a voice that was trying very hard to be quiet about it and not entirely succeeding. Webb's voice, also very controlled, also very close to something much larger underneath. We're through, Claire said. She heard him exhale. She kept flying. Segment 2 fell away. Segment 1 opened up. And then the canyon mouth was behind them, and the open desert was ahead, and the storm was coming from the left, and the base was 60 miles to the east, and the aircraft was heavy, and the wind was picking up, and the second wave was 32 minutes out, and there was still a lot of flying left to do. But they were out of the canyon. All of them. Claire pushed the throttle toward the base and let herself feel for exactly 1 second the full weight of everything that had just happened. The briefing room, Mesa's finger in her face, Holt reading the accident report, the sloped landing zone, the 9 seconds, 31 centimeters, 1 second. Then she put it away. Control Donovan, she said into the radio. We are clear of Black Mesa Canyon, 6 souls aboard, all alive, heading your direction. The silence that came back was not quite a silence. There was something in it, a texture, a held breath, the sound of a room full of people who had been watching a tracking display and waiting. Walker's voice when it came was not the professional voice. It was something else. Copy that, Donovan, he said. All 6. All 6, she confirmed. She flew into the storm. The storm tried to push her back. She pushed harder. Behind her in the cabin, one of the rescued men said something she couldn't quite make out. She thought it might have been thank you. She wasn't sure. It didn't matter. She flew. The open desert hit them like a different world. After the canyon, after the walls and the gap and the 9 seconds and 31 centimeters of margin, the open air should have felt like freedom. And for exactly 4 seconds it did. 4 seconds of relative space of radar, showing nothing on either side of the canyon mouth, falling away behind them into the darkness. Then the second storm wave made its presence known. Not gradually, not with warning, It arrived the way serious weather arrives when it has been building for hours and has finally run out of patience all at once. From three directions simultaneously, a wall of turbulence that hit the aircraft at 1:03 a.m. and immediately made every calculation Claire had done on the outbound flight feel like ancient history. The helicopter dropped 40 feet in 2 seconds. Not a controlled descent, a fall. The aircraft simply stopped having the air beneath it that it needed and went down the way the objects go down when physics stops cooperating. The altimeter spun. The engine screamed. The cabin erupted in sounds that were not quite panic, but were the immediate physical relatives of it. Sharp intakes of breath. The crack of someone's head against the frame equipment, shifting hard against its restraints. Claire pulled collective with both hands. The aircraft fought her. She pulled harder. Altitude, she said, not a question. Just the word, just the demand for the number. 360 above deck, Reyes said. His voice was completely flat. The flatness of total concentration. Climbing 400, 420. She leveled at 430. Her hands were already hurting. The controls in severe turbulence require constant physical force, not just input. The wind doesn't just push the aircraft, it fights through the controls themselves, and holding a heading through that fight is a full-body effort that accumulates the way any sustained physical effort accumulates. She had 41 minutes of flying left. She knew it was going to feel like much longer. "Talk to me," Chief Webb said from the back. His voice was level. He was doing the thing professionals do in a crisis, projecting stability for the people around him, even when his own internal situation was something other than stable. "We hit the second storm wave early," Claire said. "It moved faster than predicted. I'm going to climb above the worst of it and use the upper air current to push east. It will add approximately 6 minutes to our flight time." 6 minutes, Webb said. 6 minutes, she confirmed. A pause. "One of our men took a hard hit when we dropped," Webb said. "Santos is checking him now." "What's his status?" A brief silence while Webb turned to assess. "Conscious. He was already wounded before we found him. Shrapnel in his left side. Santos has him stabilized, but he needs a surgical team." "How stabilized?" Claire asked. Because stabilize was a word that covered a very wide range of realities. "Well enough for 6 minutes," Webb said. And then more quietly, "Probably." "Probably." Claire pushed the nose up and began the climb to altitude. At 1:07 a.m. Walker's voice came through on the radio, and it had a quality that Claire had not heard from him before, something strained at the edges, something that the professional exterior was working harder than usual to contain. "Donovan Control, we have an update on the storm movement. The second wave is stronger than the radar showed. Wind speeds at your current altitude are going to peak at 51 knots in approximately 08 minutes. 51 knots. At their current weight with 6 additional people aboard, 51 knots of crosswind at altitude was an entirely different problem from anything she had managed so far tonight. "Copy," she said. "We are recommending you divert to Ridgecrest Station," Walker said. "Closer by 12 miles. Medical facilities are limited, but what's the surgical capability at Ridgecrest?" she asked. A pause. "Basic trauma. No OR." Claire thought about the word probably. "Raven Rock has the OR," she said. "Raven Rock is 12 miles further into the storm path." "I know where Raven Rock is," she said. And then more quietly, so that only Reyes could hear, "What is the condition of the man in the back?" Reyes turned his head slightly and looked through the cockpit opening. He could see Webb and Santos working over a figure lying on the cabin floor. He could see the color of the man's face, which was not a good color. He could see Santos's hands moving with the particular urgency of a medic who is managing a situation that is getting rather than holding. "Not good," Reyes said quietly. Claire stared at the instruments. 12 extra miles and 51-knot winds carrying a man who needed an OR in an overloaded helicopter. Or 6 fewer miles basic trauma care and a surgical team that wasn't there. She made the decision the way she made all decisions under pressure, not by eliminating fear, but by moving through it to the thing on the other side. "Raven Rock," she said, "tell them to have surgical standing by." She keyed the general radio. "Control Donovan, we are continuing to Raven Rock, requesting immediate surgical team notification. We have 1 critical trauma shrapnel wound left lateral. Santos will relay specifics." Walker didn't argue. "Copy Donovan. Surgical team will be ready. ETA." She calculated. Current airspeed against projected wind, 6 minutes of added time from the altitude change. 12 extra miles. 31 minutes, she said. A pause that lasted just slightly too long. Copy, 31 minutes. She heard something in that pause. She filed it away. At 1:09 m, 6 minutes into the open desert flight, Reyes said, "We have a new problem." He said it the way you say something when you have been looking at it for 30 seconds, trying to determine if it is actually a problem before you say it out loud, and you have concluded that yes, it definitely is. Engine 2 oil pressure, he said. It's been dropping for the past 4 minutes. Slowly, but it's dropping. Claire looked at the gauge. He was right. The drop was subtle, the kind of thing you'd catch on a pre-flight check or a routine instrument scan. Not the kind of thing that triggered alarms immediately, just a slow, persistent decline that said something is wrong and getting more wrong. Rate of decline, she asked. Reyes watched the needle. About 2 units per minute, he said. 2 units per minute. At that rate, in approximately 14 minutes, the pressure would drop below the operational minimum, and they would need to reduce power on engine 2 to protect it from damage. Or reducing power on engine 2 while flying overloaded in 51 knot winds at altitude would mean engine 1 carrying a load it was not rated for alone. She ran the math. The math was not comfortable. "When did you first notice it?" she asked. "About 12 minutes ago," he said. "In the canyon. I thought it was a gauge fluctuation from the turbulence." "It might still be," she said. "It might be," he agreed. Neither of them believed it. She keyed the radio again. "Control Donovan. Possible engine 2 oil pressure issue. Monitoring. Do not relay to base until I confirm." "Why not relay?" Reyes asked quietly enough that the radio didn't catch it. "Because if I relay it now, Mace is going to order me to divert to Ridgecrest," she said. "And the man in the back doesn't have an OR at Ridgecrest." Reyes looked at her. "And if the engine goes," he said. "Single engine, this weight, this wind," Claire said. "It's going to be a very focused 20 minutes. "Focused," Reyes said. "That's one word for it." She kept flying. At 1:14 a.m., Santos appeared at the cockpit door. He was 24 years old and had the face of someone who had aged several years in the last hour. His hands had blood on them from where he'd been working on the wounded man. He looked at Claire's profile in the dim cockpit light and said, "Major, he's deteriorating. The turbulence is making it worse. Every time we drop or roll, it moves things internally that I cannot fix in this aircraft." 31 minutes, she said without looking away from the instruments. "I need 20, Santos said. "I can give you 27, she said. "I'm going to increase airspeed. It's going to make the ride rougher." "Can you manage rougher?" Santos looked back into the cabin at the man he was working on. "Define rougher," he said. "More turbulence, less predictable, but faster." Santos was quiet for 3 seconds. "Do it," he said. "I'll manage." He went back into the cabin. Claire pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft accelerated into the storm. The turbulence became immediately and significantly worse. The way pushing faster into bad weather always makes things worse before it makes them better. And the sounds from the cabin shifted into something that required discipline to ignore. Claire ignored them. She had to. The only way she helped the man in the back was by flying this aircraft with everything she had, and everything she had required her complete attention. At 1:16 a.m., the oil pressure gauge dropped below 80 units. She watched it cross the line. "Reyes," she said, "I see it. We're going to start reducing engine 2 load gradually. I don't want a sudden power change at this speed in this wind. Gradual reduction. Copy." He began the process, slowly redistributing load to engine 1, monitoring temperature and pressure on the remaining engine with the focused attention of someone diffusing something. The aircraft performance changed, subtly, like the difference between running at full capacity and running at 92%, not catastrophic, not immediately noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but real. She felt it in the controls. She felt it in the responsiveness. She felt it in the way the aircraft pushed back at the wind compared to the way it had been pushing back 30 seconds ago. Less margin, everywhere. "How long can we maintain this?" she asked Reyes. He watched the engine, one temperature. 20 minutes comfortably, he said. "Maybe 25 if we push it." 25 minutes. She had said 27 to Santos. She updated the calculations silently and said nothing about the difference. At 1:19 a.m., Webb came forward. He crouched behind the cockpit seats, one hand on each headrest. his face close to the gap between the two pilots, his voice very low so the men in the back couldn't hear him clearly. "What's our real status?" he asked. It was a direct question from someone who had the right to ask it. Claire answered it directly. "One engine partially compromised. Manageable for now. Oil pressure is low. We have enough to reach Raven Rock if conditions don't worsen significantly. And if they do, then we manage whatever they give us." Webb looked at the instruments for a moment and then at her. "You knew about the engine before you pushed the speed up," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "You accelerated anyway. Your man needed 20 minutes. I had 27. Now I have 24. That's still more than he needs." Webb absorbed that. "You traded engine safety for his time," he said. "I balanced them," she said. "There's a difference." Webb looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "I've worked with a lot of pilots." "I know," she said. "I've never worked with one who balanced things the way you do." She didn't respond to that. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a response that was appropriate that didn't become something other than flying. Webb went back to his men. At 1:23 a.m., the radio crackled with a transmission that was not Walker. It was Mace. His voice was different from the command shelter version. Still controlled. But there was something in it, an undercurrent, a texture that had not been there when he'd spoken to her from a position of complete authority 4 hours ago. "Donovan," he said, "this is Mace. I'm reading your telemetry from here. I see the engine 2 numbers." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "Yes, sir." "You didn't report it immediately." "I was managing the situation, Colonel." "That's not procedure, Major." "No, sir, it's not." A pause. "I'm going to ask you one question," Mace said, "and I need an honest answer." "Yes, sir." "Can you make it to Raven Rock?" She looked at the engine 1 temperature. She looked at the oil pressure gauge on engine 2, which had stabilized at 63 units. Not good, but not falling further, at least not at the rate it had been. She looked at the distance readout. She looked at the wind speed indicator. She did not look at Reyes because she already knew what he would say, and she needed to answer this herself. "Yes," she said, a pause. "You're certain." "I'm as certain as anyone can be certain about anything in a 50-knot storm with a compromised engine," she said. "Which is to say I'm not certain, but I believe we can do it." Another pause. Longer this time. "What does your co-pilot say?" Mace asked. Reyes had heard the whole exchange. He turned to Claire now, and she met his eyes for exactly 1 second. He said, "She's right. We make it." Mace was quiet for 4 seconds. "All right," he said. And then after another pause, "Donovan." "Sir, don't make me wrong about this." She held the radio for a moment. "I'm not doing this for you, Colonel," she said. "With respect." A very long pause. "No," Mace said. "I know you're not." The radio clicked off. Reyes looked at her. "Did you just tell a full colonel that you're not doing this for him?" he said. "I said with respect," she said. Reyes almost smiled. Almost. The situation was not quite a smiling situation, but almost. At 1:27 a.m., the storm hit its peak intensity. The wind speed reached 53 knots, 2 above the predicted maximum because weather does not feel any particular obligation to honor its predictions, and the aircraft went through the worst turbulence of the flight. Not the sharpest single moment, which had been the 40-foot drop at the storm entry, but the most sustained, the most relentless, the longest stretch of continuous instability in the air. For 8 minutes straight, from 1:27 to 1:35, the helicopter was in constant motion. Not always dramatic motion, not always the kind of motion that felt life-threatening, but constant, never a full second of level, stable flight. Always something, a correction, needed a heading adjustment, a power compensation for a gust, a recovery from a drop. The cumulative effect of 8 minutes of that kind of flying is not dramatic in the way individual moments are dramatic. It is the slow accumulation of demand on a human body and mind that eventually approaches a limit. Claire's hands hurt. They had been hurting since the canyon, but she had not fully registered it because registration required attention she couldn't spare. Now in the 8th minute of sustained turbulence, she registered it. A deep ache in both forearms. The muscles that control fine movement in the hands and wrists exhausted from constant compensatory input. She did not mention it. She did not adjust her grip. She flew. At 1:31 a.m., Santos came back to the cockpit. His face had changed. "I need 5 minutes," he said. Claire looked at the distance readout. "We're 17 minutes out," she said. "I can give you 5. Santos looked at the man in the back and looked at his watch and did the calculation and nodded once sharply and went back to work. Webb watched Santos work from across the cabin. He had been watching for the past 20 minutes with the particular quality of attention that people give to things they cannot control and cannot look away from. One of the men on the floor was Petty Officer First Class Daniel Reyes, no relation to the co-pilot who had been Webb's teammate for 3 years, who had been the person in the canyon holding the red light when the helicopter came in, who had kept the beacon running through 2 days in that canyon, who Webb knew kept the other 5 men focused and alive through the force of his own refusal to believe that nobody was coming. Daniel had been the one holding the light. Daniel was the one on the floor now. The universe had a sense of dramatic irony that Webb had never found particularly funny. At 1:33 a.m., something changed in the engine 1 temperature gauge. Reyes saw it first. "Temperature rising on engine 1, he said. "Slowly, but rising." Claire looked. He was right. When you reduce load distribution from 2 engines to 1, the remaining engine runs hotter. That was expected and accounted for, but the rate of temperature increase mattered, and right now the rate was slightly higher than the model predicted, which said something about how hard engine 1 had been working for the last 30 minutes of sustained storm flying at above normal throttle settings. "What's the ceiling?" Webb, she asked. "Red line is at 94 degrees, he said. "We're at 88. 6 degrees of margin, 14 minutes of flight." She ran the numbers. At the current rate of increase, they would hit red line in approximately 16 minutes. They needed 14. 2 minutes of buffer in a 53-knot storm with a compromised secondary engine carrying 6 rescued men, plus 4 operators, plus crew at maximum speed. 2 minutes. "Reyes," she said. "Yeah. I'm going to increase airspeed again." He looked at the engine 1 temperature. "If we push harder, the temperature rises faster," he said. "I know. But if we get there faster, we need the engine for less time. The math works in our favor." Reyes did the math. He did it quickly because that was his job and he was good at his job. "By about 90 seconds, he said. 90 seconds, she confirmed. "That's not a large margin." "No," she said. "It's not, but it's on the right side of 0. She pushed the throttle. The aircraft accelerated. The engine temperature began rising faster. In the cabin, the turbulence intensified with the speed increase. Gear shifted. Someone grabbed a handhold. Santos braced himself over his patient and kept working with the focused exclusion of someone who has made an absolute decision about what matters and is honoring it completely. At 1:37 a.m., Reyes said, "Engine 1 at 91 degrees, 3 degrees of margin, 11 minutes to base." "Hold," Claire said. At 1:39 a.m., Reyes said, 92, 2 degrees, 9 minutes. At 1:40 a.m., the base lights appeared. They were not close. They were small and distant, a cluster of amber and white in the darkness ahead. But they were there, and the sight of them did something to the atmosphere in the helicopter that was impossible to fully describe. A collective shift, a slight change in the quality of every person's breathing, the way people breathe differently when the thing they've been moving toward is finally visible. "Visual on base," Reyes said. "I see it," Claire said. 8 minutes, he said. "Engine temp," she asked. He looked. 92 and holding, he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite disbelief but was close. "It's not climbing." Claire didn't react. She already knew why. The temperature had been climbing as a function of accumulated heat, and at maximum speed, the increased airflow was providing just enough additional cooling to hold the rate, not to reduce it, to hold it, which meant the margin wasn't growing, but it wasn't shrinking either, which was enough, just enough. 6 minutes, Reyes said. At 1:43 a.m., Walker came on the radio. "Donovan, control, we have you on visual approach. Runway is clear. Medical teams are standing by. You are cleared direct to the medical pad, not the main runway. Repeat, direct to medical pad." "Copy medical pad," she said. "We have 1 critical trauma, ET, a 4 minutes. 4 minutes, copy, they're ready." She began the descent. Every pilot knows that the final approach is where fatigue lives. The concentrated intensity of a difficult flight has a way of waiting until the destination is in sight and then making itself known not as dramatic failure, but as the accumulation of everything the body has been absorbing for the past hour and a half. The small degradation of fine motor control, the very slight slowing of processing speed, the way the hands want to make inputs that are one beat behind where they need to be. Claire felt all of it. She compensated for all of it. With 4 minutes of flying left, she was not going to let any of it matter. Engine temp, she asked. 92.4, Reyes said. Still holding. Airspeed, 114 knots. Reduced to approach speed. Reducing. The aircraft slowed. The medical pad came into view, lit with floodlighting that turned the gray concrete brilliant white. She could see figures moving around the edges of the pad medical team. She knew 6 or 8 people with equipment, standing by doing the focused preparation of professionals who know that what they need to do starts the moment the aircraft touches down. She thought about Daniel Reyes in the back, holding the red light in the canyon, keeping 5 people alive on the belief that someone would come. She brought the aircraft down. At 1:47 a.m., the skids touched the medical pad at Raven Rock Training Base. The landing was not her most elegant. She knew it even as it happened, slightly harder than optimal, the fatigue in her hands translating into a contact that was firmer than she would have chosen with fresh muscles and a full rest. But it was solid, controlled. The aircraft was on the ground, and it stayed on the ground, and the systems held, and the engine temperature peaked at 92.7 degrees Celsius and then began to decrease. 2.3 degrees below redline. The medical team was at the door before the rotors had fully slowed. Santos was already directing them, his voice cutting through the engine wind down, with the authority of someone who has been managing this situation for the past 46 minutes and is not going to stop managing it now just because the aircraft has landed. Daniel Reyes was carried out on a stretcher. He was unconscious. He was alive. The medical team moved with the organized urgency of people who are doing exactly what they trained for, and they disappeared through the doors of the medical facility in less than 90 seconds, and then the pad was quiet except for the settling sounds of the helicopter and the wind and the distant noise of the base. Claire shut down the engines. The rotors slowed. The instruments dimmed. She sat in the cockpit and did not move for approximately 15 seconds. Reyes, the co-pilot, sat beside her in the same stillness. Neither of them spoke. There are moments after extreme performance where the body and mind need a few seconds to negotiate the transition from maximum activation to something else, and those 15 seconds were that negotiation. Then Claire heard boots on the concrete outside. Multiple sets. She removed her helmet. She opened the cockpit door. Walker was there, standing on the pad with his jacket open and his face showing everything he had been keeping out of his voice for the past 97 minutes. He had 3 other people with him, but she barely registered them. She climbed down. Her legs were shaking. She hadn't expected that. The hands she had prepared for the arms, even the back, but the legs surprised her. They held her, but they shook. Walker looked at her. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have spent an hour and a half watching a tracking signal move through a canyon and a storm, and you have run every calculation about what could go wrong, and you have made peace with some of the worst possibilities, and now the person is standing in front of you, and you are recalibrating what your eyes are telling you against what your fear had been telling you. Engine 2, he said finally. Oil pressure issue, she said. Needs inspection. Engine 1 ran hot but stayed below red line. He nodded slowly. And you, he said. She looked at her hands. They were still shaking. Fine tremors, barely visible. I'm fine, she said. Walker looked at the hands too. Claire, he said. I'm fine, Ethan, she said. And then more quietly, I just need a minute. He took a step back, giving her the minute. She looked at the medical facility doors where the team had taken Daniel Reyes. Is he going to be okay? She asked. Walker's face shifted. They're saying yes, he said. They think yes. It's going to be a long night for him, but the surgeon said if he'd arrived 20 minutes later, he stopped. She absorbed that. 20 minutes. She had given Santos 5 of those 20. She had pushed the throttle and accepted the engine temperature risk for 7 more. She had chosen Raven Rock over Ridgecrest for the surgical team. 20 minutes. She didn't say any of that. There was nothing to say about it. It was the math. It was the mission. It was what had happened. Behind her, Chief Webb stepped off the helicopter. He walked toward her, and when he reached her, he put out his hand. She shook it. He held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake. "I've been doing this job for 14 years, he said. "I've been extracted from some very difficult places by some very capable people." He paused. Tonight was something else. Claire looked at him. "Your people got themselves home," she said. "I just drove." Webb almost smiled. "You just drove," he said. "Sure." He let go of her hand. He turned and walked toward the medical facility where his team was, where Daniel Reyes was in surgery and the others were being assessed, and where the particular aftermath of extreme survival was settling over everyone like a second weight on top of the first. Claire turned back to the helicopter. She needed to do the post-flight inspection. She needed to document the Engine 2 status. She needed to write the flight report that covered every deviation from standard procedure that she had made tonight, including the oil pressure issue she had not immediately reported, including the speed increase she had used to manage the engine temperature margin, including the landing zone assessment she had recalculated in real time while navigating a canyon. She was going to write all of it exactly as it happened. Every decision, every calculation, every moment where she had deviated from procedure, and why. She was not afraid of that report. She had done what the mission required. She could defend every decision she had made, not because she was certain every decision was optimal. No decision made under those conditions in real time was optimal, but because every decision was honest, calculated, and made with the lives of the people in that aircraft as the primary variable. She picked up her checklist. Reyes appeared beside her. "I can do the post-flight," he said. "We do it together," she said. He didn't argue. They began to work through the checklist, moving around the aircraft in the slow, methodical way of people who have been running at maximum intensity and are now deliberately slowing themselves down to the pace that careful work requires. At 1:58 a.m., they reached the Engine 2 inspection panel. Claire opened it. She looked at the oil system components. She found it immediately. A hairline fracture in one of the seals, small, barely visible. The kind of thing that would have been caught in a standard maintenance cycle but had opened up under the sustained stress of the storm flight and the canyon approach and the overloaded performance demands. She looked at it for a moment. A seal smaller than her thumb. The thing that had almost determined whether 6 people came home tonight. She photographed it for the report. She closed the panel. She looked up at the Arizona night, which was still wild and moving and indifferent, the storm still passing overhead, with the slow, enormous force of something that exists on a completely different scale from human urgency. She thought about the briefing room. She thought about Mace pointing at her. She thought about papers scattered across the floor. She thought about the 9 seconds in the canyon, 31 centimeters on the left, 59 on the right. She thought about a red light circling in the darkness, 340 meters past the narrowest point of the canyon, someone holding it up with whatever strength they had left, pointing it at the sky, and trusting that someone was coming. Someone had been coming. She had been coming. She put the photograph in her mission folder. And somewhere across the base inside the medical facility, a surgeon was working on a man named Daniel Reyes, who had kept a beacon burning for 2 days in a canyon in a storm, and the odds were getting better every minute, and the night was still very long, but the morning was coming too. It was always coming. You just had to stay in the air long enough to reach it. The report landed on Colonel Richard Mace's desk at 6:14 a.m. 47 pages. Every decision documented, every deviation from standard procedure explained with the kind of precise, unapologetic clarity that comes from someone who has nothing to hide and knows it. Engine 2 oil pressure issue, page 11, with photographs. Speed increase decision and engine temperature, trade-off calculation, page 19. Landing zone reassessment in real time, page 26. The choice of Raven Rock over Ridgecrest, page 31, with the surgical timeline attached as an appendix. Claire had been awake all night writing it, not because she was required to have it done by morning. The standard timeline for mission debrief documentation was 72 hours. She had it on his desk in 4.5. She did it because she knew what was coming, and she intended to meet it standing up with every fact in order. She was in the mess hall drinking her 3rd cup of coffee when Walker found her at 7:02 a.m. He sat down across from her without asking if the seat was taken and put his own coffee on the table and then looked at her with the expression of someone who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. "He read it," Walker said. "Already," she said. "He was in his office when it arrived. He read it in 2 hours." Claire looked at her coffee. And she said, Anesho. Walker was quiet for a moment. He wants to see you at 0800, he said. She nodded. Is that all he said? Walker hesitated. One beat, barely perceptible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Claire was always paying attention. He said to bring the flight data recorder summary, Walker said. She looked up. The flight data recorder, not just the written report, the actual flight data, every control input, every power setting, every second of the flight recorded in objective numbers that could be compared against procedure and standard, and the regulations that governed what pilots were and were not authorized to do in the air. She held Walker's gaze. He's building a case, she said. Walker didn't deny it. I don't know what he's building, he said carefully. I know he asked for the FDR summary. Ethan, she used his name directly. Is he going to use the oil pressure reporting delay against me? Walker looked at the table. That was its own kind of answer. The regulation requires immediate reporting of any engine anomaly during flight operations, he said. You delayed reporting by approximately 11 minutes. I was managing the situation, she said. That's your defense, Walker said. Not mine, not his. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Her hands had stopped shaking around 4 a.m. They were steady now, but she could still feel in the deep tissue of her forearms the residual ache of 97 minutes of fighting a storm. 6 people came home, she said. I know, Walker said. Daniel Reyes is in recovery. The surgeon said another 20 minutes and the outcome was different. I know, Walker said again, and his voice had something in it that was not agreement exactly, but was a sound of a man who finds himself on the wrong side of a logic he cannot argue with. And Mace is going to open a formal review, she said. I don't know that, Walker said. I know he asked for the FDR summary. That's all I know. She stood up. She picked up her coffee. All right, she said, 0800. She walked back to her quarters. She had 1 hour. She used 40 minutes of it to sleep sitting upright in the chair at her desk, her head against the wall. The practiced, abbreviated rest of someone who has learned over 12 years that sleep when you can means sleep however you can. She set an alarm for the 20th minute and slept until it went off, then sat up and was immediately completely alert. The way trained people are alert, not gradually, not with the slow morning fog of normal human waking, but all at once the mind returning to full operational status, like a system coming back online. She changed into a clean uniform. She looked at herself in the mirror, not for reassurance. She was long past needing a mirror for that. She looked because she needed to see that she looked like what she was a major in the United States Military Aviation Corps who had completed a mission last night that most of the people on this base would not have attempted, and who was about to walk into a room with a man who was going to try to use the tools of institutional authority to reframe what had happened as something other than what it was. She straightened her collar. She picked up the flight data recorder summary from the printer tray. She walked to Mace's office. At 7:58 a.m., she knocked on the door. Enter, Mace said. She went in. The office was standard issue functional with the particular organized quality of a man who uses order as an expression of control. Mace was behind his desk. He was in full uniform. He had a printed copy of her 47-page report on the desk in front of him, and she could see from across the room that he had marked it tabs of colored paper at multiple pages, handwritten notes in the margins. He had done the work. Whatever he was building, he had done the work to build it carefully. She came to attention. Sir, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Sit down, Major, he said. She sat. He opened her report to page 11. Engine 2 oil pressure anomaly, he said. First noted at approximately 1:09 a.m. by your co-pilot. You did not report it to control until 1:23 a.m. That is 14 minutes, Major, not 11. She had written 11 in the report. She recalculated quickly. He was right, it was 14. 14 minutes, she said. You're correct, sir. Regulation AR-60-7, he said, and he did not need to look it up. Requires immediate reporting, defined as within 2 minutes of any in-flight system anomaly that could affect mission safety. You were 12 minutes late. She held his gaze. Yes, sir, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Mace said, That's all you have to say. I've documented my reasoning in the report, Colonel, she said. Page 19. If I had reported immediately standard protocol, would have required a divert assessment. Given the location, the protocol divert would have been Ridgecrest Station. Ridgecrest has no surgical capability. Petty Officer Reyes was on the floor of my aircraft with a shrapnel wound that required an OR within 20 minutes. Raven Rock has the OR. Ridgecrest does not. Mace looked at her steadily. You made a medical triage decision, he said, for a patient, in a cockpit, during a flight. I made a mission management decision, she said, which is within my authority as pilot in command. The regulation disagrees, he said. The regulation was written for situations where the patient isn't already in the aircraft, she said, and she kept her voice completely even. I had a man bleeding on my floor, a compromised engine, in 2 facilities at different distances with different capabilities. I weighed those factors and I made a decision. A pause. The patient is in recovery at Raven Rock. The surgeon says he'll walk out of here in 3 weeks. Mace tapped his finger on the report. He didn't respond to that immediately. He turned to page 26. Landing zone assessment, he said. You identified a slope of 4 degrees and adjusted your landing technique in real time without consulting control. There was no time to consult control, she said. The approach was active. A 30-second delay to request consultation would have cost me the window and required a go-around in worsening conditions. Standard procedure is to abort and reassess, he said. Standard procedure assumes a different set of conditions than I was managing, she said. A go-around in that canyon at that weight in those wind conditions with the team loaded would have significantly increased the risk of rotor contact with the canyon walls. You made that determination yourself. I made it in approximately 2 seconds with the information available to me, she said, which is what pilot and command authority exists for. Mace closed the report. He leaned back. He looked at her with an expression that was impossible to read with complete confidence. Not hostile exactly, but not resolved either. Something in between. Something that suggested a man who came into this meeting with a clear purpose and has found the meeting more complicated than he expected. Major Donovan, he said, I'm going to be direct with you. I'd appreciate that, sir, she said. I came into this meeting this morning intending to recommend a formal flight review board, he said, based on the reporting delay and the in-flight procedure deviations. She absorbed that without visible reaction. And now, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 2 hours reading your report, he said, and then I spent another hour reviewing the surgical team's timeline documentation for Petty Officer Reyes. He paused. Their record shows that when Reyes arrived at the OR, the attending surgeon assessed his injury as critical and time-sensitive. The surgeon's note states that delay of more than 15 to 20 minutes would likely have resulted in fatal internal hemorrhage. He paused again. You landed at 0147. You cleared the canyon at approximately 0102. The flight from canyon exit to base was 45 minutes. Ridgecrest is 12 miles closer. At your airspeed, that's roughly 7 minutes less flight time. He looked at her. Which means if you had diverted to Ridgecrest, Petty Officer Reyes would have arrived at Ridgecrest approximately 38 minutes after canyon exit. He would have been at a facility with no surgical capability. The timeline indicates he would not have survived to a transfer. The room was very quiet. Mace put his hands flat on the desk. Your procedural deviation, he said slowly, is the reason that man is alive. Claire said nothing because there was nothing to say that the facts hadn't already said. Mace looked down at his desk. He looked at the 47-page report. He looked at the tabbed pages with his handwritten notes in the margins. Then he said something that Claire Donovan had not expected to hear from Richard Mace in this meeting or any other meeting. I owe you an apology, he said. The words landed in the room with the particular weight of things that are said by people who do not say them easily. Claire looked at him. She said nothing, partly because she was genuinely surprised, partly because she had learned that when someone says something true and difficult, the correct response is to receive it rather than redirect it. Last night in the briefing room, Mace said, the way I spoke to you, the way I handled the aircraft selection. He paused. I was wrong, not just tactically wrong about the aircraft, which I was, wrong in how I treated you as an officer and as a professional. He paused again, and what came next seemed to cost him something real. I've been in command positions for 22 years. I have operated with certain assumptions about certain kinds of pilots. And last night, you flew an operation that demonstrated those assumptions were wrong. He met her eyes. I don't say that easily, but I say it. Claire sat with it. The room held the weight of it. Thank you, Colonel, she said finally. And she meant it, not warmly, not with forgiveness fully deployed, but with the sincerity of someone who recognizes that it is actually harder for certain men to say they were wrong than it was for her to fly through that canyon last night, and who respects the difficulty of hard things. Mace nodded. He picked up her report. I'm not opening a review board, he said. The procedural deviations are documented. They'll go in the file as mission-specific adaptations under pilot and command authority, with the surgical timeline as supporting justification. He paused. That's the accurate characterization. That's what the record should show. Yes, sir, she said. There is one more thing, he said. He reached into his desk drawer. He produced a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk to her. She picked it up. She read it. It was a formal recommendation. Her name at the top, her mission designation below it. And at the bottom, Mace's signature, already applied clean, deliberate, exactly the handwriting of a man who had decided something and committed to it. The recommendation was for the Distinguished Flying Cross. She read it twice. She looked up. Sir, she said, and for the first time in this meeting, her voice carried something other than its professional surface. Not much, just a trace of the thing underneath. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I'm doing it because the record should accurately reflect what happened last night. What you did last night. He paused. That's all. She looked at the paper. All right, she said. Dismissed, Major, he said. She stood. She came to attention. She walked to the door. She had her hand on the handle when Mace said Donovan. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression that had shed the last of its official coating and was just a man's face, complicated and honest. When I told the room to remove you last night, he said, you walked out without fighting it. Yes, sir. Why stay behind, he said. With everything you knew, with the data you had, why didn't you push back harder in that room? She thought about it. Because fighting you in that room wasn't going to get those 6 people out of the canyon, she said. The argument wasn't the mission. The mission was the mission. She paused. I went to do the thing that would actually help. The argument could happen afterward. It did. Mace looked at her for a long moment. That's better judgment than most officers twice your age, he said. I learned it the hard way, she said. Sir. She walked out. The corridor outside Mace's office was empty at 8:23 a.m., and Claire stood in it for a moment, the recommendation paper in her hand, and let herself feel the fullness of the last 12 hours without managing it down to something smaller and more professional. Not for long. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then she folded the paper, put it in her breast pocket, and walked toward the medical facility. Daniel Reyes was out of surgery. She knew that because Walker had texted her at 6:30 a.m. with 2 words, he's out. She had been in the middle of the report when the message came through, and she had read it and gone back to the report because there was nothing she could do about Daniel Reyes's recovery, and there was a great deal she could do about the document that was going to determine what the record said about last night. Now the report was filed, and Mace had read it, and the review board was not happening, and the recommendation was in her pocket, and she walked to the medical facility and asked the desk nurse which room. Room 7, the nurse said. He's awake. He's asking questions. She walked down the corridor and knocked on the door of room 7. Yeah, said a voice from inside, weak but present, unmistakably present. She opened the door. Daniel Reyes was in the bed with 2 IVs in his left arm, in a drainage tube she didn't look at directly, in the kind of pallor that comes from significant blood loss, in the particular alertness of someone who has been unconscious and is very glad to no longer be unconscious. He was 29 years old. He had a scar on his chin from a previous mission that Webb had mentioned in the canyon. Claire now saw the same slightly rectangular face as her co-pilot, which was entirely coincidental and which would become a story that got told for years afterward about the 2 Reyeses on the Black Mesa mission. He looked at her. His eyes registered something recognition, she thought, though she didn't see how, since he had been unconscious when she landed. You're the pilot, he said. Major Claire Donovan, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Webb told me, he said, before they put me under. His voice was slow, conserving energy. He said the pilot was a woman named Donovan. He said she flew through segment 3 in the dark, in the storm. He paused to breathe. He said the margin was 31 centimeters on the left, she said. Reyes closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. I was holding that light for 6 hours, he said. Before you came, 6 hours. Circling it every 30 seconds, so the battery wouldn't die, keeping it going because... He stopped, breathed, because I needed to believe someone was coming. Claire looked at him. Someone was coming, she said. He exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that carries things. I know that now, he said. She sat in the chair beside his bed. She didn't stay long. He needed rest and she needed sleep, and there were 100 administrative things that wanted her attention. But she stayed for the time that felt right, which was the time it took for him to ask 2 more questions. What was the weather doing now? Which was a pilot's question, and told her something about who Daniel Reyes was and whether Webb had slept yet, which was a teammate's question, and told her the rest. She told him the storm had passed. She told him Webb had been in the medical facility corridor when she walked through at 8:30 and had not looked like a man who had slept. Reyes almost smiled. That sounds right, he said. She stood up. Rest, she said. Major, he said before she reached the door. She turned. He was looking at her with the direct, unfiltered quality of someone who is too tired to perform anything and is just saying the thing. Thank you, he said, for not turning back. She held his gaze. You kept the light on, she said. That's what gave me something to fly toward. She walked out. In the corridor, she found Webb sitting in a plastic chair against the wall, with his arms on his knees and his head down, and he looked up when he heard her steps. How is he? Webb asked. Awake, she said, asking about the weather and about you. Webb let out a breath that was the sibling of the one Daniel Reyes had just exhaled. The same family of releases, the sound of sustained tension, finding an exit. He's going to be fine, Webb said, not a question. That's what the surgeon said, she confirmed. Webb nodded. He looked at the floor. I've been sitting here for 4 hours, he said. I can't make myself leave. I know, she said. Is that... He stopped. Is that normal? She looked at him. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, 14 years in special operations, who had run missions in places she had only seen on classified maps, who had the physical composure of someone trained to function through things that would disable most people. Sitting in a plastic chair in a hospital corridor, unable to leave. Yes, she said, that's completely normal. He nodded again. Okay, he said. Good, that's good. He didn't move. She sat down in the chair next to him. She hadn't planned to. She had planned to go back to her quarters and sleep for 6 hours and then deal with the day's administrative pile. But she sat down because sometimes the right thing is not the planned thing, and the body knows before the mind does. They sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of 2 people who have been through something together that is larger than what language handles well, and who have arrived at a point on the other side of it where the silence is its own kind of communication. At 9:17 a.m. Reyes, the co-pilot James, appeared at the end of the corridor. He was in a fresh uniform, and he had clearly not slept either, which was evident in the particular brightness of his eyes that comes from fatigue that has passed the stage of feeling tired and arrived at a strange clarity beyond it. He looked at Claire and Webb sitting side by side against the wall. He walked over. He sat down on the other side of Claire. Now there were 3 of them in plastic chairs in the corridor of the medical facility, and none of them said anything for approximately 45 seconds. Then Reyes said, I keep replaying the gap. Claire looked at him. The 9 seconds, he said. I keep seeing the radar display. The walls. He paused. 31 centimeters. Stop replaying it, she said. I'm trying it, he said. It's done, she said. We're through it. Everyone who needed to get through it is through it. He was quiet. Were you scared? He asked, not looking at her, looking at the floor. She considered the question. She had learned over her career that there were 2 kinds of answers to that question. The answer that sounded impressive, which was some version of no, or the answer that was true. Yes, she said. I was scared from the moment we entered the canyon until the moment we cleared segment 3 on the way back. Maybe a little before, probably a little after. Reyes turned and looked at her. You didn't show it, he said. I wasn't flying with my face, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I've flown with 17 different pilots in the last 4 years. I've been in some very bad situations. A pause. Last night was the best flying I've ever seen. She looked at him. She didn't deflect it. She had learned that deflecting genuine assessments from people who know what they're looking at is a form of false modesty that serves no one. "Thank you," she said. Webb on the other side of her made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the neighborhood of one. 17 pilots, he said. "I've flown with a few more than that, and I'm going to have to agree with the man." Claire looked at the ceiling. "You're both overtired," she said. "Probably," Webb said. "Doesn't make it wrong." At 10:03 a.m., the thing that Claire had not known was coming walked down the corridor in the form of a senior officer she recognized but had never spoken with directly. Brigadier General Patricia Howell, Commanding General Special Operations Aviation Command. The woman whose signature was on the authorization for every Special Operations Aviation mission in the Southwestern Theater. 51 years old, 30 years of military service. The kind of record that didn't require a biography because the record spoke for itself. Howell walked with the particular efficiency of someone for whom every minute is allocated and who wastes none of them. She had 2 aides behind her and a tablet in her hand, and she was moving with purpose. She saw Claire. She stopped. Her aides stopped. She looked at Claire for a moment, and Claire stood up because a brigadier general in a corridor requires you to stand up and came to attention. "Major Donovan," Howell said. "General," Claire said. Howell looked at her with an expression that was not easy to categorize. Not warm, not cold, precise. The expression of someone doing an assessment rather than having a reaction. "I read your mission report at 06:30, Howell said. "All 47 pages. "Yes, ma'am," Claire said, "and then I read Colonel Mace's recommendation." She paused. "I approved it." Claire said nothing. "I also read the surgical timeline for Petty Officer Reyes," Howell said, "and the flight data recorder analysis." She paused. "And then I pulled your complete service record." She looked at Claire steadily. "Would you like to know what I found in your service record?" "Yes, ma'am," Claire said. 12 years of exceptional performance evaluations, Howell said. 6 formal commendations. 3 letters of recommendation for advanced positions that you did not receive." A pause, right? "And 4 separate instances of what are documented in your file as attitude concerns or command friction, each of which occurred when I traced the specifics in situations where you identified a safety or operational issue that contradicted a senior officer's assessment and reported it." The corridor was very quiet. 4 times, Howell said. "In 12 years, you were marked as a problem because you were right and someone above you was wrong. And rather than being recognized for the judgment that made you right, you were penalized for the friction that came from the correction." Webb and Reyes were both very still on their chairs. Claire kept her eyes on Howell. "Ma'am," she said, because there was nothing else to say in this moment, and because sometimes the only response to truth is to receive it. "I'm telling you this," Howell said, "because I want you to understand that I see the pattern clearly, and because the purpose of my being here this morning is not purely to check on Petty Officer Reyes, though that is also why I'm here." She paused. "I have a position opening in my command, Senior Aviation Planner Special Operations Integration. It involves mission design, aircraft selection, operational protocol development." She held Claire's gaze. "The position has been vacant for 4 months because I have not found an officer with the right combination of technical skill, mission experience, and the particular quality of judgment that last night's mission demonstrated." Claire absorbed that. "I would like you to consider it," Howell said. The corridor was silent enough that the ventilation system was audible. Claire looked at Howell. She thought about 12 years. She thought about the briefing rooms and the marked files and the 4 attitude concerns and the comment about different kinds of judgment. She thought about the training course instructor who told her it was too demanding and the flight hours she had built in the years after that in conditions that most of her critics would not have volunteered for. She thought about Mace's finger in her face and the papers scattered on the floor, and the moment she stood up, even straighter, instead of sitting back down. She thought about 31 centimeters. She thought about a red light circling in a canyon for 6 hours. "I'd like to know more about the role," she said. Howell nodded. It was not a warm nod. It was the nod of someone who received the answer they came to receive. "My office, 1,400 hours, she said. "Yes, ma'am," Claire said. Howell looked at Webb. "Chief Webb," she said, "how is your team?" "All 6 accounted for, ma'am," he said. "Reyes is in room 7. The others are being assessed. We'll be operational again, and he thought about it. I'd say 4 weeks. 3, Howell said. Webb blinked. Ma'am, I'll have physical therapy assigned to your unit starting this afternoon, she said. 3 weeks. Yes, ma'am, Webb said in the voice of a man who has just recalculated his timeline. Howell looked at Claire one more time. 1400, she said. Yes, ma'am, Claire said. Howell walked away down the corridor with her aides and the space she left behind. Her had a different quality to it than the space before she arrived, the way rooms change when significant things have just been said in them. Webb looked at Claire. Senior aviation planner, he said. Special operations integration. That's what she said, Claire said. That's a position people spend 15 years trying to reach, he said. I know, she said. You're going to take it, he said, not a question. She looked at the door of room 7. She thought about what the position would mean, the scope of it, the missions she could shape before they were flown, the protocols she could build that reflected what pilots actually encountered rather than what planners assumed they encountered. She thought about the aircraft selection decisions and the canyon flight profiles and the surgical timeline calculations that would be built into the planning process from the beginning rather than improvised at 1:03 a.m. in a storm. She thought about how many future missions would be different if the person designing them had flown through a 9-second gap with 31 centimeters of margin on the left side. Yes, she said, I'm going to take it. Reyes leaned back in his plastic chair. Good, Hayden, he said quietly. That's really good. They sat in the corridor for a while longer. Not because there was nothing to do, there was a great deal to do, but because the specific kind of stillness, after extreme effort, has its own legitimate claim on time, and honoring it is not weakness. It is the opposite of weakness. It is the recognition that the body and the mind have done something that required everything they had, and that recovery is not an indulgence, but a necessity. At 11:15 a.m., Claire finally stood up. She looked at Reyes James, and said, Get some sleep. You too, he said. She looked at Webb. He's going to be fine, she said it again. Webb nodded. He was looking at the door of room 7. I know, he said. He stopped. I know, she said. She walked back through the facility. She walked across the base. She went to her quarters and lay down on top of her made bed in her clean uniform and closed her eyes. She had 3 hours before the meeting with Howell. She needed 2.5 of them. She thought in the last few seconds before sleep arrived about the moment in the briefing room when she had stood up instead of sitting back down. She had not known in that moment how the night was going to go. She had not known about the engine oil seal, or the sloped landing zone, or the updated team position past segment 3. She had not known about Daniel Reyes in the red light, or Santos's hands working over a man on the floor of a helicopter in a canyon in a storm. She had known one thing, that sitting back down was not something she was going to do. That was all she had known, and it had been enough. Sleep took her at 11:23 a.m., and for the first time in 24 hours, her hands were completely still. She was 7 minutes early to the meeting with General Howell, not because she was nervous. Claire Donovan had stopped letting nerves determine her timing 12 years ago. She was early because she was always early, because early meant you had already assessed the room before the conversation started, because preparation was the one variable she had always been able to control when everything else was someone else's decision. Howell's aide showed her into the outer office at 1:53 p.m. and told her the general would be with her shortly. Claire sat down. She did not check her phone. She did not review notes. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill in itself, the ability to be completely present without filling the present with noise. At exactly 2 p.m., the inner office door opened. Howell was on the phone. She held up one finger to Claire 1 minute and continued the call, pacing behind her desk with the contained energy of someone for whom stillness is a professional choice rather than a natural state. Claire watched her without appearing to watch her. She heard fragments. Not enough to assemble context, but enough to hear the quality of Howell's voice on the call, which was different from the voice in the corridor, less measured, more direct, the voice of someone who is speaking to an equal or a superior, rather than someone she is assessing. The call ended at 2:03 p.m. Howell set the phone down. She looked at Claire. Sit, she said. Claire sat. Howell remained standing. She moved to the window, not looking out of it, just standing near it, using the space the way experienced leaders use space as a tool rather than a background. I'm going to tell you something I don't normally tell candidates for this position, Howell said, and I'm going to tell you because I believe you've earned the full picture, and because the full picture is going to determine whether what I'm offering you is something you actually want. Claire waited. The position I described this morning, Howell said, Senior Aviation Planner Special Operations Integration. That title is accurate but incomplete. The role has a second function that isn't in the official description. She paused. For the past 18 months, I have been working with a small team to develop a new operational framework for special operations aviation. Not just new protocols, a fundamental revision of how we assess risk, how we select pilots for complex missions, and how we integrate real-time field judgment into pre-mission planning. She looked at Claire directly. The framework has been developed largely by people who have never flown a mission like Black Mesa Canyon. It is technically correct. It is procedurally sound, and it is missing something that I have been looking for a way to add. Field experience as a design input, Claire said. Howell looked at her. Yes, she said, and the single word carried the particular quality of someone hearing their own thought completed by another person. What you're describing, Claire said carefully, is building a planning framework that accounts for what pilots actually encounter rather than what the models predict. Precisely, Howell said. Which means the framework will sometimes authorize deviations that current regulations prohibit, Claire said, like not reporting an engine anomaly for 14 minutes because the reporting protocol would have triggered a divert that would have killed the patient. Howell didn't flinch. The framework will codify the decision-making process that experienced pilots use under conditions that standard protocols were not designed for, she said, which is a different thing from authorizing violations. It's building a system that recognizes those conditions exist and provides pilots with the authority and the structure to respond to them appropriately. Claire absorbed that. And the pushback, she said, significant, Howell said. There are people in this command, senior people who believe the current protocol structure is adequate and that what happened last night is an exception that should be managed as an exception rather than incorporated into the system. Mace, Claire said. Howell looked at her. Among others, she said, Colonel Mace has been the most vocal critic of the framework revision. He believes it creates too much individual discretion at the cost of command authority. She paused. He also recommended you for the Distinguished Flying Cross this morning and approved your consideration for this position. People are complicated, Major. Claire looked at her hands. Yes, she said, they are. The question I need you to answer, Howell said, is whether you want to step into a role that is going to put you in direct opposition to some of the most powerful people in this command. Not covertly, not diplomatically, directly. She held Claire's gaze. Because the framework only works if the person building it is willing to defend it in rooms where it will be attacked. And the person attacking it in those rooms will sometimes be someone like Mace, someone who has the authority and the institutional weight to make your career very difficult if they choose to. The room was quiet. Claire thought about 4 attitude concerns in 12 years. 4 times marked as a problem for being right. 4 times the friction of correction had cost her something. She thought about a 47-page report delivered 4.5 hours ahead of deadline. She thought about 31 centimeters. General, she said, I've been in opposition to powerful people in this command since the day I arrived. The difference between then and now is that then I was doing it from the back corner of the room. She paused. I'd rather do it from a position where the opposition actually changes something. Howell looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Claire had not seen her do yet. She sat down. She leaned back slightly in her chair. And something in her expression shifted from the precise assessment mode into something that was very briefly more personal. I have been in this uniform for 30 years, Howell said. I have fought for things that mattered and lost. I have fought for things that mattered and won. And I have learned that the difference between those 2 outcomes is almost never about being right. She paused. It's about being willing to stay in the room long enough for right to become undeniable. Claire looked at her. You stayed in the room last night, Howell said, in the canyon in the storm, with a compromised engine and a man bleeding on your floor. You stayed until right became undeniable. I had to, Claire said simply. Yes, Howell said. That's exactly the point. You had to. She leaned forward. Most people, when it costs them enough, stop having to. They find a reason why the cost is too high. They find a regulation that makes stopping acceptable. They find a version of the situation where turning back makes sense. She paused. You didn't do that. You don't do that. And that quality, that specific, stubborn, impossible quality, is what this framework needs. At 2:31 p.m., Claire said yes. Not dramatically, not after a long pause that was building towards something. She just said it the way she made all her real decisions, clearly, without performance, without needing the moment to be larger than it was. Yes, she said. I'll take the position. Howell nodded. Good, she said. You start in 3 weeks. There will be paperwork. There will be briefings. There will be a meeting with the people who are currently opposed to the framework, in which you will be expected to present your perspective on last night's mission as a case study. She paused. One of those people will be very uncomfortable sitting across from you. Mace, Claire said again. Among others, Howell said again. Claire almost smiled. She walked out of Howell's office at 2:44 p.m. and stood in the corridor for a moment in the particular way she had stood in the corridor outside Mace's office that morning, not with triumph, not with relief, but with the quiet recognition of a person who has moved from one chapter to the next and is taking a second to register the transition before continuing. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks. She walked back to the medical facility, room 7. She knocked. Yeah, Daniel Reyes said. She opened the door. He was sitting up now, which was different from this morning. More color, more alertness. The look of someone whose body had started the work of deciding it was going to recover. One of the other rescued men, a petty officer named Garza, was sitting in the chair beside the bed with a deck of cards, and they appeared to have been in the middle of a game. Reyes looked at her. You look different, he said. I slept, she said. That's not it, he said. He studied her. Something happened. I took a new position, she said, starting in 3 weeks. What kind of position? She thought about how to describe it accurately and briefly. The kind where what happened last night changes how the next mission is planned before it goes wrong, she said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then Garza, who had been holding his cards and pretending not to listen, said, good. Just the one word, from a man who had spent 2 days in a canyon and knew exactly what went wrong when planning met reality. She stayed for 12 minutes. She asked Reyes about his sister. He had mentioned her briefly in the canyon when he was holding the light talking to keep himself awake, and Webb had mentioned it in the aircraft, and he told her his sister was 17 and wanted to be a pilot and had been calling every 12 hours since the news got out. Claire told him to tell his sister to look at the aviation aptitude testing in her junior year. Reyes said he would. They talked about nothing significant for a few more minutes, and the nothing significant was its own kind of significant, the way ordinary conversation between people who have been through something extraordinary is never quite ordinary. She said goodbye. In the corridor, she found Webb again. Different chair, same wall, same posture. He looked up when she came out. How is he asked. Same question as this morning. Better, she said. Same structure as this morning. Different content. Webb nodded. I talked to Garza, Webb said, and Santos and the others. He paused. They all said the same thing. What did they say? They said the moment they heard the helicopter in the canyon, something changed. Not just the situation, something in them. He looked at the floor. Santos said he'd been managing Daniel for 2 hours in that aircraft, and every time he thought about losing him, Webb stopped, started again. He said when he heard those rotors in the canyon, he stopped being scared. Just like that. Like someone turned off a switch. He looked up at her. You did that. Claire looked at him. The sound of an engine in the dark, she said. When you've been waiting for it, that's not nothing. No, Webb said, it's not nothing. They sat with that for a moment. Then Webb said, I put in a formal commendation this morning. For you and for Reyes, both Reyeses. He almost smiled at that. Walker co-signed it. Howell already approved it. I know, she said. She mentioned it. Webb looked at her. She offered you something, and he said. It wasn't a question. He had the perceptiveness of someone who has spent 14 years reading situations and people in high-stakes environments. Yes, Claire said, you took it. Yes, he nodded slowly. Good, he said. You should be making decisions that matter from somewhere that can hear them. She looked at him. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, who had asked her in the canyon whether she had ever aborted a mission, who had told his operator to let go of the harness, who had come out of that helicopter in the dark, on a sloped landing zone in a crosswind, and moved his people with the efficiency of someone who had already made peace with every possible outcome, sitting in a plastic chair in a hospital corridor because he couldn't make himself leave. Take care of your people, she said. Always, he said. She walked away. At 4:15 p.m., an unexpected thing happened. She was in her quarters working through the first layer of administrative requirements for the position transition when there was a knock at the door. She opened it. Lieutenant Bradley Holt was standing in the corridor, 26 years old. The pilot who had almost been sent into Black Mesa Canyon in the wrong aircraft. The pilot who had read the accident report and said the words 4 centimeters in the briefing room and changed the direction of the night. He was in a fresh uniform, and he was holding something, a folder she saw, and something else. A printed document. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and has just decided standing at the door to abandon the rehearsal and say the true thing instead. Major Donovan, he said, he stopped. I've been trying to figure out what to say since last night. You don't have to say anything, Lieutenant, she said. Yes, I do, he said. I said yes in that briefing room before I checked the numbers, because Mace was looking in my direction and I wanted to be the answer. He said it plainly without excuse. And if you hadn't been in that room, I would have flown the A6 into that canyon with the wrong rotor diameter in those conditions. He paused. I know what that means. Claire looked at him. You read the accident report, she said. I read it 45 seconds after you left the room, he said. Because you said to. He held up the printed document. I've read the whole thing now, all 212 pages. She looked at the document in his hand. 4 centimeters, she said. 4 centimeters, he agreed. And I was going to say yes because a colonel was looking at me. She leaned against the doorframe. Holt, she said. You caught it. That's what matters. You read the report and you said the thing you needed to say, and you said it to the right person. Because of you, he said. Because you're a good pilot who was in a bad situation and you found your footing, she said. That's different. He looked at her for a moment. I want to be better, he said. And the simplicity of it, no performance, no military language, just the plain statement of a 26-year-old who has looked at what almost happened and has decided to become someone different, landed with a weight that more elaborate speeches never quite achieve. Then be better, she said. Learn the regulations well enough to know when they apply and when the situation has moved past them. Build your hours in conditions that scare you while you still have margin to learn from them. And the next time someone in authority is looking in your direction, expecting a yes, make sure the yes is actually right before you say it. He nodded. He held out the folder. This is for you, he said. She took it. She opened it. Inside was the full accident investigation report for the 2019 Black Mesa Canyon crash. The same report she had spent 4 months on as part of the investigation team. But this one had tabs, Holt's tabs, and handwritten notes in the margins. Questions. Page after page of questions, the kind a pilot asks when they're not just reading a report, but trying to understand a failure deeply enough to not repeat it. She looked up at him. You annotated the whole thing, she said. Last night, he said, I couldn't sleep. She looked back at the annotated pages. Something moved in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not pride, exactly. Something more specific. The feeling of watching the next iteration of something begin, the knowledge being passed forward, the lesson that costs something real becoming the foundation of someone else's understanding. Keep it, she said, closing the folder and handing it back. He looked at her. I want you to have the questions, she said, because the questions are better than anything I could tell you. They mean you already know how to learn. He took the folder back. He stood in her doorway for another moment. Are you staying at Raven Rock? He asked. No, she said. New position, 3 weeks. Where, Howell's command, she said. His eyebrows moved. Barely, but the recognition was there. That's, he started. Yes, she said. He absorbed that. Good, he said. Just like Garza. Just like Reyes. The same single word said by three different people with three different relationships to what had happened, all landing with the same unambiguous meaning. He left. She closed the door. She stood in her quarters for a moment. She thought about the 6 weeks she had left at Raven Rock before the transition, the missions that would fly without her, the briefing rooms she would no longer be in the back corner of, the new rooms she would be walking into in Howell's command, where different fights were waiting and where the stakes, if she did the job right, were larger than any single mission, because they were the conditions under which all future missions would be planned. She thought about the framework Howell had described, the gap between what the models predicted and what pilots actually encountered. She thought about every mission she had flown in 12 years and what she would have built differently if she had been building the planning structure instead of flying inside it. There was a great deal she would have built differently. There was a great deal she was going to build differently now. At 6:30 p.m., she went back to the mess hall. Walker was there. He was eating alone at a corner table, which was where he always ate when he had something to think through, and he had the look of someone in the middle of a thought that was taking longer than expected. She sat across from him. He looked up. "Howell told me," he said. "I figured she would," Claire said. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she confirmed. He looked at his food for a moment. "I'm going to miss having you on this base," he said. Not sentimentally, just as a fact, the way honest people state facts that carry weight. "You're going to be fine," she said. "I know I'm going to be fine," he said. "That's not what I said." She looked at him. Ethan Walker, who had stood up in the briefing room and said those 6 men outrank all of our egos. Who had come to the flight line and said, "I'll see what I can do about the door." Who had been on the radio for 97 minutes in a command shelter 60 miles from a canyon, watching a tracking signal and doing the calculations about what could go wrong and making peace with some of the worst possibilities. "Thank you," she said, "for the door." He looked at her. "I didn't do much," he said. "You did exactly enough," she said. He picked up his coffee. "Last night when you cleared the canyon on the way back," he said, "I heard it in your voice when you came on the radio. All 6, the way you said it." He looked at the table. "I've been in this job for 16 years. I've heard a lot of transmissions from a lot of missions." He paused. "I've never heard anything quite like that." She thought about this moment, the canyon mouth falling away, the open desert, the signal in her headset. "I've never said anything quite like that," she said. He nodded. They ate in silence for a while, the comfortable silence of people who have been through something real together and don't need to narrate it to each other to keep it close. At 7:44 p.m., Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen. A number she didn't recognize. Area code she didn't know. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. Major Donovan. A young voice, female, nervous. "Speaking," Claire said. I'm sorry, this is probably weird. My name is Reyes, Maya Reyes. Daniel Reyes is my brother. He gave me your number from the nurse's station. He said I could call." A pause. "I hope that's okay." Claire looked at Walker across the table. He raised an eyebrow. "It's okay," Claire said. I wanted to say thank you." The voice on the phone was trying very hard to be composed and was not entirely succeeding, which was the most honest thing Claire had heard all day. "They told us this morning what happened, the canyon, and that they told us everything. And I just needed a breath. He's my big brother. He's everything. And I needed to say thank you to the person who..." She stopped. Claire waited. "I'm going to be a pilot," Maya Reyes said. Differently now, not as part of the emotional overflow, as a statement of fact, as something she had decided. "Daniel says I should. He says I should call you and ask how." Claire looked at the table. She thought about a 17-year-old who wanted to fly. She thought about a 22-year-old who had walked into a recruitment office with a private pilot license paid for by diner shifts and the unshakable belief that wanting something hard enough and working for it consistently enough were the same as being allowed to have it. She thought about what she would have told herself at 22 if she'd had someone to call. "Get your private license first," Claire said. "Before anything else, find an instructor who respects your questions, not just your progress. And when someone tells you something is too demanding for you," she paused, "make a note of their name, because that name is going to mean something to you later. It's going to be the name you think about when you need to go one more mile." Silence on the line. Then, Okay, Maya Reyes said, okay. Your brother kept a light on for 6 hours in a canyon in a storm, Claire said, because he needed to believe someone was coming. That's who your family is. She paused. Fly like that. She heard the sound of someone trying not to cry and mostly failing. I will, Maya said. I promise. Claire hung up. Walker was looking at her. Who was that? He said. The next one, Claire said. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. 6 days later, Daniel Reyes walked out of the medical facility on his own 2 feet. He walked slowly with Webb beside him and 2 of his teammates just behind, and when the doors opened and the Arizona morning hit him, the air and the light and the specific feeling of being outside after being inside in a medical bed for 6 days, he stopped walking for a moment and just stood. Webb stood next to him. Neither of them said anything. Then Reyes said, the light. What? Webb said. I keep thinking about the light, Reyes said. 6 hours I held that thing. And I kept thinking, what if nobody comes? What if the storm is too bad? What if the beacon dies? What if... He stopped. And then I heard it, the rotors, and I thought she came. He looked at Webb. I didn't know it was a she. I didn't know anything. I just knew someone came. He paused. That's the whole thing. That's everything. Someone came. Webb looked at him. Yeah, he said. She came. 2 weeks and 4 days after the mission, Claire Donovan cleared out her office at Raven Rock Training Base. It didn't take long. She had never accumulated the kind of personal accumulation that some people build in an office over years, photos and mementos, and the physical evidence of a life built in one place. She moved light. She always had. Not because she didn't value things, but because she had learned that the things she valued most were not the kind you put in boxes. Her last afternoon at the base, she went to the flight line, not to fly, just to walk it. She walked past Base 7, where her aircraft was parked, currently grounded for the engine, 2 seal replacement that had been completed the week before. She walked the length of the flight line in the late afternoon light, not thinking about anything in particular, just walking the ground she had walked for the past 3 years and letting it be what it had been, a place where she had learned things and done things and become more fully the person she had been on her way to becoming. She stopped at the end of the flight line. She looked at the Arizona sky, which was clear today, the storm of 3 weeks ago completely gone, the air washed clean and still. She thought about the meeting that was waiting for her in Howell's command next week. The framework meeting, the room full of senior officers, some of whom were going to push back, some of whom were going to question her authority to be there, some of whom were going to look at her with the same expression Mace had used in the briefing room 3 weeks ago. She thought about what she was going to say, not the words specifically. The approach, the same approach she had used in the briefing room when she had walked back in with her tablet and her Canyon flight profile, and had said without preamble, without warm-up, without asking for permission to speak, segment 1 is manageable. She was going to walk in, she was going to present the data, she was going to say what was true, and she was going to stay in the room until right became undeniable. That was the whole plan. It had always been the whole plan. At 5:47 p.m., she picked up her bags. She walked to her car. She drove off the base. In the rearview mirror, the flight line receded in the control tower in the Base 7 hangar in the temporary command shelter where a SEAL captain had once asked a room full of people if any of them were combat pilots. She drove toward the next thing. Behind her on the flight line, the aircraft in Base 7 sat in the late afternoon light with its new seal and its full engine status restored, ready for the next mission, the next storm, the next canyon, the next person who would sit in the left seat and make the decisions that the models couldn't predict and the regulations couldn't fully cover. Ready for whoever would come next, because someone always had to come next. That was how it worked. Someone had to be willing to stand up in the back of the room and say, I know that canyon. Someone had to be willing to fly into the place where the walls were 11 meters apart and the margin was 31 centimeters, and the storm was getting worse, and the engine was running hot, and the man on the floor needed 20 minutes. He wasn't going to get if you turned back. Someone had to hold the light, and someone had to fly toward it. Major Claire Donovan had been both of those people on the same night, and she was driving now toward the work of making sure the next person who sat in that left seat would have a better plan to fly into and a clearer authority to adapt it when the plan met the canyon and the canyon won. She drove into the Arizona evening. The sky ahead was clean and open and entirely hers. And she did not look back again because everything she needed was in front of her. And she had never been the kind of person who confused knowing where you came from with needing to stay there. She had stood up once in the back of a room when no one else would. She was still standing. And she intended to keep standing in every room that mattered for as long as it took for right to become something no one in the room could argue with anymore. That was who she was. That had always been who she was. The road opened ahead and Claire Donovan drove forward into it without hesitation, the way she flew with everything she had toward the thing that needed doing because someone had to, and she had long ago decided that someone was going to be her.